Hey guys, welcome to Scrum Master full course video by Simplilearn. In this video, we'll cover some of the most important concepts related to Scrum. We'll talk about what exactly Scrum is, the components of Scrum process, the role of a Scrum Master, the Scrum methodology, how Scrum meetings work, how Scrum and Kanban are different from one another, and finally, we'll cover some important interview questions that will help you ace your interview. Our instructors, Jeff and Chandra, will help you understand the topics with ease. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon to never miss an update from us. Now, let's jump right in.
Hi, welcome to Scrum tutorial from Simplilearn. I am CMR Chandra MR, a professional consultant and coach who is certified Scrum Master, PMP, Prince 2 practitioner, ITL 4 managing professional, DevOps and COVID 5. As part of this tutorial, we are going to understand the basic understanding requirements of Scrum, the Agile methodology. So let us look at a problem scenario. What was there in the absence of adoption of Agile in any given environment? So in the given scenario, there is a problem expressed. So we have a problem. Our consumer doesn't like our product. We will have to make changes immediately. So now, as usual, any manager would respond. The manager says, make the changes. So because it's always the changes or anything what we deliver is in the consumer's interest. So keeping consumers' interest in mind, the value which needs to be created for customers, any changes required to be done in any of our projects involving that consumers and customer, we may require to do the change. So but what is the problem here to do the change? So we can't. We already have started work on last batch. The waterfall model we follow doesn't let changes to be made midway through the process. So is it mean the waterfall model never allows the changes to happen? That is not true 100%. Waterfall model allows us to make changes, but it doesn't allows us to make the changes quickly. So whenever there is a change, it requires a lot of effort. It requires changes in documentation. It asks for the changes in various different implementations which is already done, which is executed already. And then a lot of efforts are involved, which is time consuming. And also it involves more cost. Now, how do we make that change which is required to the customer, and at the same time we don't have any specific additional effort which are required? So these efforts, whatever is being put, is acceptable to both the parties, both the stakeholders, that is the project organization as well as the customer. So how do we make it happen quickly as well? That is very important for us. So we should have used the agile methodologies. So meaning agile methodology helps us to do this. So one of the agile methodologies which we are going to look at as part of this tutorial is Scrum. So let us see how Scrum is going to help the scenario. So scenario of changes which are coming up more frequently, right? Right, so before that, let us understand what is the meaning of Agile. What is the meaning of Agile, what it means, and why should we adopt Agile? So Agile means moving faster, being flexible, responding to the changes. Now, Agile is a set of methods and practices that focuses on iterative development. Why iterative? In each iterations, Agile methodologies helps us to create a working piece of the software product, which will help us to make quick corrections to that software piece. This is not a whole product, it is part of that bigger product. So requirements and solutions are obtained thanks to self-organizing cross-functional teams collaborating. So when we say cross-functional team, self-organizing team, so these are the teams which are 7 plus or minus 2, the size of the team what I'm speaking about, who basically have various different skills. Each of the team members will have various different skills and they complement to it. I think today the DevOps is speaking about this cross-functional team owning everything as a single team. Some of the organizations has already demonstrated their DevOps capabilities by having this approach, like having self-organizing and cross-functional team, having an accountability for the entire product, the particular piece of the product module what they have created. So this helps in improving accountability and also ensures better visibility of the product what is being created and delivered. So further, let us look at the advantages of using Agile. So what it gives to us. How it helps? So now the organization who follows the agile methodologies, so we can see that projects follow a predefined schedule and have a predictable cost. So schedules are seen, but wherever there is a changes required, wherever there is a directions need to be changed in terms of making necessary changes to adopt to the required scenario, the change scenario, agile helps us. It gives that flexibility. So clients have visibility of each phase of project. So it is very essential whosoever adopts the agile methodology, the active involvement of customer has to be ensured. So they are actively involved. So customers or clients actively involved in the sense they know it, what is happening, what they are getting, they know. They are acknowledging it by giving the feedbacks every now and then so that there is no surprise to them at the end, which used to happen during waterfall approaches. Then greater interaction between project team and the project means there needs to be collaboration. Agile emphasizes on having the collaboration. So Scrum in specific have something called daily Scrum, where 15 minutes meeting, where entire Scrum team should come in, sit together, self-organizing team as well as all that Agile team has to come together, express what they have completed before the last daily Scrum meeting and what is pending, why is it pending, and what is that they're going to do before the next meeting. So all these are expressed. This will help the team as well as the Scrum Master as well as the product owner, the visibility into what is complete, what needs to be completed, and this will help project manager or Scrum Master to provide the necessary inputs, better visibility to the customers and stakeholders as well. Product output is predictable and can sometimes happen earlier than expected. So now initially, as we know, so the visibility of anything what we do will be very less. So now as we discuss more and more, as we brainstorm more and more, the visibility into it will become more. Then what would happen in future, the ability to predict will also become easier. And this doesn't happen only with the project team, it also happens with customers and every stakeholders who are involved in the project. So next, high quality development, testing and collaboration is ensured since the project is broken down. So now each iterations, each module, each piece of software which is being created are tested regularly and feedbacks are obtained from the user as well. Active involvement of user are ensured so that they are acknowledging it. So the what customer needs are given. So it is not that I discover something which I did not need. I'm seeing it. I told something, I'm getting something. That scenario is eliminated. Then the product backlog can be refined and reprioritized. So since we move iteration wise, depending on the change scenario, depending on the directions changes, we can keep reordering or reprioritizing our product backlog. What needs to be created first? If I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 item, I can make it as 3, 4, 1, 2, 5. So depending on the change scenario, whenever it needs to be executed, it is a bit flexible and easy to do. Then teams can maximize project value since clients can provide project priority. So as we know, the visibility also increases to the consumer as well as all the stakeholders. They will also express what is that value they have seen from this, and this will also help in making a decision, should we continue with this project or should we not. So better visibility, better decision making, better value realization. The needs of the customer can be focused on increasing the value delivered. So as customer gives the feedback, as that visibility increases, then a customer is getting that value and then expressing what is that changes, what is that additionally they may require here, how can make it better. So these interactions can happen. So customer can be focused on increasing the value delivery. So in fact, I think earlier we used to speak about time to market. Today we are speaking about time to value, which means how quickly the consumers, the users or customers realizes the value. Is that benefit realized? So that's what the more and more discussion which is happening, which requires closer collaboration with consumers and their feedbacks, their experiences with the products or services which are being used by them. It is very essential to understand. So then various different methodologies what we have in Agile, we can speak about Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, that is XP, Lean methodologies, the Crystal. So now in this video tutorial, we are actually focusing on Scrum. So let us understand what is this Scrum is all about, right? So before we go and understand what is the Scrum itself, so let us look at the history of Scrum, where it started, how it started. So right down the line during 1986, the name Scrum is first introduced by the management experts Yukijiro Nonaka and Hirotaka Takuchi. So Japanese. So now this terminology was introduced, but later in 1995, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schreiber creates the early version of what would become the agile methodologies. So now earlier 1995, so need for agile was sensed and it was spoken about. I mean, why do we need agile methodologies in future? What would be the future organization which would look like? So that would trigger in terms of what kind of approaches we may require to have. So further 2001, the Agile Alliance is founded and first look on Scrum, the agile software development with Scrum is published. So then further down the line 2002 the Scrum Alliance is founded by Weber and certifications are added. Then later 2006 the Scrum Inc is created. The certified Scrum courses are taught. So people started getting certified on Scrum. Then later 2009 scrum.org is created which offers the professionals Scrum series of certifications. Then 2010 the first Scrum guide is published, so which made available to everyone. So from then I think the more and more people start adopting Scrum methodologies. Now interesting part is the journey started from 1980s till 2010, various changes which has happened to this particular methodology. But one thing we should keep in mind is same 20 years back or 15-20 years back if we go, the need for agile was not seen. So it was spoken, but need for agile was not spoken much. But today we are speaking about it more and more. The reason is, I think, the change in the market condition, the increase in the competition, the need of responding to the change which is asked by the consumers or the market variations has become more and more important for organizations and service providers. If they don't respond to the change, they may lose out in the competition. So their survival is at stake. So it is very essential for them to understand these dynamics and respond to those scenarios quickly. So that's where the adoption of Agile, the benefit of adopting Agile were realized and Scrum become popular. So what is Scrum? So let us look at that. So now Scrum is a framework that enables teams to work together. Means collaboration is very important while we become agile. So with Scrum team, one can see and experience. So learning from experiences happens. So those are captured. Self-organize working on problems. So they work together. They discuss, brainstorm, reflect on their victories. Means any achievements has to be celebrated, acknowledged, quick wins recognized, and their losses to improve. So wherever the things doesn't go good, necessary corrections has to be done. I think Scrum approach would help in terms of doing it quicker, better. Then some of the benefits using Scrum would look like team can provide project deliverables and in an efficient manner. So in time, we are completing all the features and functionality. So the entire model, the methodology, what is there, which helps in accomplishing those. Then further, time and money are used efficiently. So time is very important. Giving results in a mentioned schedule is very important. Ensuring results are coming up effectively is important, efficiently, the performance of that products. Now since we are creating those small piece, working piece in every iterations, so that experience of using that would also be there and quick feedbacks will come back so that time and money is saved and we are doing in time. So projects are divided into smaller units called sprint. So the iterations, what I was speaking about, the quick iterations of activities which happens during the adoption of Scrum when organization adopt the Scrum methodology. So it is called a sprint. It's a time boxed iterations which will have a subset of product backlog taken as a sprint backlog, and those users stories and epics are delivered as part of that sprint, and then those are reviewed on a daily basis as part of daily Scrum meeting. And also we have other meetings which will happen when we go and look at Scrum methodology, how this happens. I think we'll get better visibility. Work best for fast moving projects. Now, whenever we need to respond quickly, whenever we want to move faster. Now, remember, when we say moving faster means it doesn't mean that we can allow any defects to happen. We can ignore something. We cannot do that. We need to ensure everything is taken care. At the same time, all those results what are created has to be acknowledged, right? Confirmed. Yes, it is defect free. So all those which is supposed to be addressed are taken care, and things are moving faster and better, and the results are according to what was actually expressed as a requirement. It is fulfilling those. Then Scrum meetings provide the team great visibility. Since there is a daily Scrum meeting which keeps happening, people speaks about what they have done from the previous daily Scrum, what is that they have accepted, they will complete, and what is complete. Is everything is complete or something is pending? If it is pending, why is that pending? And what is that you are going to do further before the next daily Scrum meeting? So these are discussed, understood. So that there is a quick 15 minutes meeting which gives the insight. And further, wherever there is a dependency, deviations which occurs, further maybe Scrum Master sit with them separately to understand that in detail. So daily Scrum meetings give the quick insights so that it increases the visibility, what is happening on ground. Constantly involves feedback from clients and customers. As I mentioned earlier while discussing about Agile, active involvement of a customer is very essential. So customer should give the feedbacks whenever that working piece of the application or a product is given. So only then whether the product or that module what is created is having that features and functionality which helps in providing necessary requirement fulfillment, is that happening or not. Then making changes based on feedback are very easy because everyone is informed and they are aware of what is being changed and what needs to be changed. Then individual efforts of the team members are given focus. Yes, individual efforts is essential. At the same time, each team member cross skills. We call it a self-organizing team, as I was mentioning earlier. So each team member will have a different skills, different capabilities, and also cross skilling within the team is encouraged, so that the ownership on individuals deliverables and team as a whole working together to deliver some features functionality can also be accomplished, right? Then Scrum team involves product owner, Scrum Master, and then Scrum team. So each of these are different roles having their own objectives to accomplish with the specific directions, and each of these cannot be merged. Like for example, the roles and responsibilities of product owner cannot be given to single individual who is a Scrum Master. So both the roles cannot be given a single individual because it conflicts the objectives of both the roles. So thinking about putting this, one of the team member becoming Scrum Master or product owner, thinking in that angle is also something which will not work, which will not give the required results. So now what are these roles? What are the responsibilities? Where is the focus of each of the roles? So let us discuss on that. Now when it comes to product owner, so the product owner is primarily responsible for maximizing the ROI by determining the product features, prioritizing it into a list, what needs to be focused on for the next sprint, and constantly reprioritizing and refining it. So the key points what we need to see here is, so one is determining the product features, maximizing the ROI, the second one, and then reprioritizing and refining the product backlog. Now why is that needs to be done? So maximizing ROI in the sense, obviously product owner should closely work with the business and have an insight towards what is that business require, what is that customer require, how it helps customer to accomplish that result, so that it helps the justifying that investment what they're doing with the product's features and functionalities. Then speaking about reprioritizing and refining it, it depends on what features needs to be delivered in what order. So there is already an order which is defined. So based on the change scenario, you can reorder it, and product owner has that ownership and responsibility. So the entire focus is on ensuring the right product backlog, prioritizing it, and also adding that user stories and epics into product backlog, depending on what makes sense to the business. So the Scrum Master, the next role, helps teams learn and apply Scrum to obtain business value. Means Scrum Master closely works with the team. So he or she helps remove impediments. What is impediments? Something which stops to move forward, something which doesn't allow to deliver things the way it is required, something which stops, right? So that needs to be eliminated. That needs to be understood. What are the impediments? So when we say impediments, what are the impediments we can think of? The skills and capabilities of the team. That is one thing. Maybe the testing environment, maybe a process. So many things comes as a bottleneck or impediments which stops things to move smoother forward. So Scrum Master should work on it, identify that, and support team or guide team to overcome those. So protects them from interfaces that helps the team to adopt agile practices. So encouraging team to adopt agile practices and ensuring they demonstrate it and provides the required value as it's move forwards. So since Scrum Master focuses one side in terms of making Scrum team to work, whereas product owner is looking at the entire product backlog and working more closely with the business. So they need to have a good handshake to ensure things go well. But these two roles cannot be merged because since it has a two different angles and two different dynamics, so spending time accomplishing both the things may become very challenging and conflicting. And prioritizing will also be difficult. Then Scrum team is a collection of all the individuals who work together to deliver the requirements of the stakeholders. So self-organizing team, what I was mentioning, what we were discussing earlier. So these teams comes together, each of the team member will have various different capabilities. So they contribute at the individual level and as a team as a whole complement or contribute towards ultimate output and outcome and value what they need to create. And this team should have a clear understanding about the deliverable what is being done. So is that deliverable what features and functionality what they're thinking, is that going to create that value ultimately what is need to be achieved, the requirements fulfillment which needs to be happen to the customers. So they need to have that understanding, the direction should be clear to the team. So there are certain artifacts to look at when it comes to Scrum, so let us look at that. So now we speak about the artifacts, which are the components of the Scrum process that can improve transparency and understanding of the work. So there are three artifacts mainly, which we call it as product backlog, sprint backlog, then product increment. So let us see what is this one by one. So when I say product backlog, so it consists of list of new features, changes to be made to existing features, the bug fixes, changes to the infrastructure and several other activities that the team needs to deliver to ensure a particular outcome. So this list of product backlogs comes with required features and functionalities what needs to be delivered. So the prioritization of this has to happen in what order what needs to be delivered. So the product backlog is the full list which needs to be delivered as part of this project, and as the project progresses a lot of new backlog item would be added to the product backlog as the dynamics of the particular scenarios keeps changing. So keeps adding, reprioritizing additional items to the backlogs are added depending on what are those dynamics. So further looking at a sprint backlog, so sprint refers to that short period of iterations, right? So which team aims to get a given amount of work done. So it helps teams deliver working software in a frequent manner. So sprint could be between 1 to 4 weeks long depending on what is that deliverable is. So sprint backlog is a subset of product backlog. So that prioritized item what is taken into sprint, which is a time boxed iterations. The sprint backlog contains the task the team aims to complete to satisfy the sprint goal. So what is that sprint goal? So each of those iterations, the time boxed iterations, will have a specific objective to accomplish. So the sprint goal is the objective decided for the sprint as an outcome of negotiation between the product owner and the team. So what can be delivered, how long it takes to deliver. So when it has to be delivered, the target may be given by product owner, but is it possible, feasible to complete it? There is some negotiation which happens there. So they decide, they agree, yes, we can do it, we cannot do it. If at all we can do it, what is that it takes in terms of effort, time and cost. So everything is decided, discussed. So that objective of that particular iterations is agreed upon. So once it is agreed, I think a team should first identify the tasks from the product backlog that need to be delivered to achieve the goal. So these tasks are then added to sprint backlog. So there should be an agreement between both. And once it is added, once it is agreed as part of that sprint, the deliverable, the output of the sprint would be the one which needs to be completed as part of it, the objectives, the goal, the results, which is specific working software. Then product increment. So this refers to the combination of all product backlog, tasks completed in the sprint, and the value of the increment of previous sprints. Now, when we speak about lean speaks about elimination of waste. It speaks about value streams. Now, in each of the sprints, as we have a working software being delivered, now each of these pieces should keep complementing to the what is the one which is already delivered and what is being delivered in future. So keeping that in mind, every deliverable will be implemented or configured in such a way that there is no specific bottlenecks, there is no specific constraints which arises. So these needs to be kept in mind, which requires the entire visibility into what is that ultimate objective we are going to accomplish. So in this product increment, all those combination of the product backlogs task which is being done should keep this in mind. Team should be very clear about it. So in the first sprint, I delivered something. In the sprint 2, I delivered something, but I cannot integrate them. They cannot work together. It will lead into the further issues and then complications. That should not happen. So when we say agile, it's about moving faster, fine. So responding to change, fine, but that should not lead towards further complexity. It should make things simpler, smoother. So Scrum is stressing on that part. So an increment refers to inspectable, usable work done at the end of the sprint. It represents a step towards overall goal or vision of the project, as I was mentioning. Then the outcome should be in usable condition, even if the product owner doesn't decide to release it. So it should be in usable condition. So two things we speak about. So one is release, other one is deployment. Now people usually get confused between release and deployment. So release about this part, what we're speaking about, product is usable. So it is released, product is usable. But only after deployment, user will have an access to use it. So that is the difference. Release makes that product usable, whereas deployment makes it available to the user to use. So this difference people should know. So release doesn't mean that it is already available for user to use. So this understanding of the difference should also be there so that one can understand what it means by release as well and what it means by deployment. That's why when we speak about DevOps, we keep speaking about CI/CD. In CI/CD, we speak about continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. So in continuous delivery, you're speaking about release basically. So once it is released, it becomes usable. So once it is deployed, it is available for user to use. And that's about the Scrum artifacts. Now let us look at Scrum framework, how that Scrum framework looks like in entirety. So what are the components comes into picture. Already we spoke about the Scrum approach itself, what it is. Now we spoke about understanding artifacts. Then we spoke about roles in Scrum, the activities for each of the roles we understood. Now where do we see all of this when we look at a Scrum framework? So that picture let us see. So when we say Scrum framework, already we spoke about the product backlog. We can see that it is in the left side in the beginning. We have a sprint planning. So we spoke about sprint, the time box iterations, and from the product backlog, the items which is moving towards sprint to a specific sprint, what needs to be delivered, which become sprint backlog. Now the backlog items are taken and Scrum team work on it and does a daily Scrum meeting. And once the deliverables of that particular sprint happens, then there is a review on it. Then the increment is delivered, and at the same time that retrospective, what was planned versus what is delivered, that is checked. If you look at from sprint review, so you have a retrospective to check what is planned versus what is being delivered. At the same time, the review points will come and get updated to product backlog as well to the product owner. So product owner should be aware what is delivered, what is pending to be delivered, and that increment is further delivered. So these increments, what is delivered to production, what is deployed in the production, should have values, that integration which happens, both all the increments coming together to provide that fulfillment of the requirement as well as creating that value what is required. So product backlog is the first step of Scrum framework, is a set of list of tasks to successfully achieve the goals of the stakeholders. We discussed that while discussing on product backlog. So further sprint planning happens where the team determines the tasks from the product catalog they will work on and aim to deliver during the sprint. Now this is negotiated, understood, agreed, and then moves towards sprint to get delivered. Then sprint backlog are the tasks discussed during the sprint planning, means the previous step, and also during the script planning, and then added to the sprint backlog. Once it goes to the sprint backlog, as part of the time boxed iteration sprint, the deliverables should happen. Now the Scrum team, which is actually self-organizing team, as we mentioned, maybe 5 to 10, 9 members of team working on the task in the sprint backlog, and they will also have a daily scrums where the team also discusses for 15 minutes on the events where the team member synchronizes activities and plan what they aim to achieve in next 24 hours, what is accomplished against what is discussed in previous daily scrum, and then if at all any further discussions need to be done in the correction of those, that can be taken as a separate meeting, not as part of the daily scrum. So generally daily scrum meeting would be 15 minutes. It should not go more than that. It's an indicative time. So quicker updates to understand what is happening. Then the sprint review happens where once the sprint is complete, so sprint review happens, which involves the team, the scrum master and product owner and stakeholders to understand what is being agreed upon and what is being delivered, so reviewed. Is that fulfilled in the entirety that is discussed? And then during this meeting, the team shows what they accomplished during the sprint. It allows time to ask questions, make observations, give feedback and provide suggestions, right? Then the product owner also presents the product backlogs top to the stakeholders to get feedback for upcoming sprints and about things related to the backlog. Now, this one sprint is complete. For the next sprint, what should be the prioritization? So the product owner has to speak with the stakeholders so that there is a good understanding, good handshake that what needs to be delivered and what is the priority in the given list. Then sprint retrospective happens. So after the sprint review, sprint retrospective happens. So during this meeting, what went well, like past mistakes, potential issues, what are the new ways to handle them which are required to be done correctly in the next iterations or next sprints needs to be identified. Data from found from here are incorporated when planning the new sprint. So it works like a lessons learned. What went well, what did not go well, what is that we did for those what did not go well. So what is that learning we have in these iterations? So how can we ensure that in the upcoming iterations the same mistakes will not repeat? So those can be discussed, documented, and then consider while moving to the next sprint. Then the increment is a workable output which is given to the stakeholders. So this is where the user actually sees that workable piece, working item, and then they give necessary feedback as well on the particular application piece or software piece. Then there is something called Scrum board which is used during this flow of Scrum, right from product backlog to the creation of that increment. So let us look at what is a Scrum board which is used during the Scrum practice. So Scrum board is a physical or virtual tool that helps team to visualize items in the sprint backlog. So it helps in tracking what is being delivered, what is in progress, and what needs to be delivered further. So it shows all action items during the daily Scrum, helping keeping the team focused on tasks that need to be completion and the priorities of those. The Scrum board is usually present in a place that's accessible to all team members. It is a visual board, right? And can be physical, whiteboard and stickers or virtual software tools which can be used and displayed on the screen. So the Scrum board is divided into different slots like to do, in progress and done. So when new sprints are started, the existing board is reset and new Scrum board is created. So since it is visual system, I think it is taking the thought from Kanban. So visual system always works effective because the moment I know, I see something is put against my name that I need to complete this, it's quite obvious to me that I will put efforts to complete it. So it's a conscious effort what I will put. It works on my consciousness. So something which is not visible to me, it is not out of sight is out of mind. So I will not work on it. So there is a tendency to forget.
First slide here has to do with user stories and epics. And what I want to do, team, is I want to, before we get into the user stories, I want to go to the whiteboard, and I want to just give you a little bit more information that might help us in organizing our discussion that we're about to embark on here. So a word that is not in our slides is themes. Themes are epics and user stories grouped together. You know, similar epics and user stories grouped together for planning purposes. So an epic is big. You would never do an epic a theme in a sprint. It's too big. So it's used for planning purposes. Below that, I would put epics. Epics are low priority, large user stories, meaning that an epic will eventually have to be disaggregated into multiple user stories. The reason it would be low priority is because if an epic was higher up on the product backlog, it would have to be more detailed. That's when you would break it down. So epics are usually going to live at the lower priority levels of a product backlog, and as user stories are completed and the epic rises in priority, it will eventually be broken down into more manageable user stories. So great big low priority user stories. Then we have user stories themselves. User stories are functions or features that the product owner wants to have developed. A user story turns into working software that provides value to the customer, and the product owner is the customer voice. The product owner is the one who would accept or reject completed user stories. And then there are tasks. And a reminder, when we were talking about the sprint planning meeting, we said the sprint planning meeting is got two parts to it. The first part is selecting all of the user stories that are going to be included in the sprint, and then disaggregating each of those user stories into tasks. That's done in the sprint planning meeting, and then those tasks are the things that are actually then done when the work of the sprint begins. User stories can be estimated in story points or ideal days. Most teams favor story points. They might start with ideal days, but they will then usually end up going to story points. Tasks are estimated in ideal time, which is usually hours. Okay, so now back to our slides. So at the top left, a use case could be an example of a user story. So it's something that the user wants to do and how the system should support it. A use case could be select and pay for items in a catalog. Now that could actually be an epic or maybe a theme, because maybe it would get disaggregated into log on screen, catalog, shopping cart, and checkout. But so the use case could either be a standalone user story, or it could actually be a number of user stories that would result from it. Below that, requirement. It could be a functional requirement, a technical task, or even a bug fix. So I'm going to go back to the whiteboard, and a product backlog is going to have a lot of user stories that come from the customer, right? Whatever the customer wants done. But the team may know that it has to do some development work in order for the user stories to even be able to work. You know, there's some system level non-functional requirements that need to be done. And so there could be tech user stories. And then, can you see this low? I can't see your chats, but then there could also be defect user stories. There could even be risk user stories. Now, what could happen is that the product owner ranks these in priority. So this one first, then that one, then that one. And the team says, well, the only thing is that we have to do some development work before we can actually do user story 2. And so what we really need to do is insert that before the second priority user story. And so the priority of the user stories in the product backlog, while it might start with just being, simple functional user stories coming from the product owner, it will evolve until it includes some other things that are also considerations when it comes to priorities, because of successor, predecessor relationships, dependencies, and things like that are considerations. A user story, back to the screen, bottom left now, the user story can use a fictitious user or a persona to help the team or the team and the product owner to get an idea of, okay, who's going to be doing this function, what are they going to need in order to be able to complete the function, etc. So you try and come up with an actual, well, a fictitious, but a person who's actually doing it, to kind of get out of the realm of, listing requirements and, specs and things like that, and say, okay, what's the user experience need to look like? Top right, template. A portion of a user story is, let me back up. So a user story card is usually going to contain a brief description of the user story using some kind of a meta-language format, like we're suggesting right here. As a user or persona, I want this feature so that I can. So not unlike our estimating session here. As a frequent traveler, I want to eat grapes so I can be healthier. In the one that we didn't do, the inventory system, as a customer, okay, there's a user. I want to get cash back so I don't have to wait in line at the bank. Okay, here's another user story. As a consumer, I want the shopping cart functionality to easily purchase items online. And maybe that could be customer as well. As an executive, right, as a suit, I want to generate a sales report so I know which departments need to improve their productivity. As a buyer, so you can see I tried to come up with these different roles right here: executive, buyer, sales rep, etc. And that's the format. As a type of user, I want some kind of goal or feature, and so that's some kind of a reason. Below that, connect the dots by writing all of the user stories necessary to uncover the entire use case. So like we were talking about right here, if you want to be able to purchase items online from a catalog, that might be multiple user stories in order to support that use case. And so, of course, we would want to be able to connect the dots and see where all the user stories fit into the overall goal of the project or release. And the stories, excuse me, are grouped to form an epic or higher level story, so epic or theme. Stories can then be split into child stories or tasks, and so that's what we were covering before, right? So you have themes up at the top. That's the biggest grouping, if you will, used primarily for high-level planning purposes. So you have your themes, then you have your epics, which are large user stories, low priority, and they're going to have to be broken down into smaller user stories. Like in the question that we had at the end of the last section, where the product owner needed something done and the team said, well, based on the size of this user story, it's going to take 3 sprints to do. Well, a user story has to be small enough to be completed within a single sprint. So a sprint can contain more than one user story, but a user story cannot span sprints. So that feature or function that was in the question was probably more like an epic. It was something that would need to be disaggregated into smaller user stories, or perhaps it was more of a use case that would need more than one user story in order to actually deliver the overall use case. Let's see, as a product supervisor, I want to see an unfinished part list at the end of the day so that I can reallocate work the next day. Great user story description. Well done, Viraj. Did you hear that, team? As a product supervisor, I want to see an unfinished part list at the end of the day so I can reallocate work the next day. That is a well-crafted description of a user story. Now, here are some things that I want you to memorize. You were hoping I was done with the memorization part. So I want you to remember that we have to invest in our user stories. And I was going over to the whiteboard and I didn't change cameras, so let me do that. I recommend figuring out how you memorize best so that you can, well, not if you wanted to. What I recommend is being able to write out all of this stuff on plain white scrap paper in about 14 minutes, because that's the amount of free time you have in the tutorial when you're at the, or when you're taking the test. Exin does it a little bit different. You maybe won't have a tutorial. The only time you'd have a tutorial is if you were at a center taking a test. Exin has other options, like you can do a paper-based test where you get a third party, a buddy or somebody who will agree to sort of proctor the test for you, or you can do it on your laptop all by yourself. And they have software that watches you while you're taking the test, and they require you to take the laptop and do like a 360 so that they can verify that you don't have any cheat sheets up on the wall or anything like that. But the point is you got to have this memorized, whether you're going to dump it out onto paper or not. When I took the test, I actually did the paper-based option. And that was because of some time constraints, and it was the quickest way to get me into the test. And so I didn't write out any of the stuff I'd memorized, but I had it memorized, and I had it memorized well enough that I could kind of recall it in my mind's eye. Okay, so we're talking about user stories, and you have to invest in your user stories. You know I like memorizing things by creating these charts that have the first letter of the word or phrase that you're memorizing in a separate column. And then I make up a story, that reminds me that I've got to have INVEST. This one is pretty easy. Probably just invest works. So let's go over that. I stands for independent. Independent, meaning that each user story stands on its own. You don't have, when we're doing Scrum, you don't do a user story that won't result in working software. We just talked about the description of user stories, right? So it's a user that needs some kind of functionality for some kind of a reason, and they're all independent. Will they work together? Of course they'll work together if that's a necessity, but if you developed a logon screen, you could demonstrate working software for the login screen. There might be another user story that is, has to do with displaying the catalog and being able to flag or select items that you want to purchase. But there'd be working software for that. Would they work together? Yes, but each user story would complete or result in some kind of working software, and they have to be independent. Negotiable. Negotiable in the way the user story is going to be implemented. The product owner doesn't dictate to the team. The team doesn't say it's only this way and we don't want to hear anything from you. So there are discussions about the size and implementation for each user user story. So the product owner can't make it so detailed that there's no room for discussion and the possibility of, the team coming up with solutions other than what the product owner was attempting to dictate. V stands for valuable, meaning each user story has to create value for the customer or the end user. E has to be estimable, as in estimatable, except estimatable is not really a word, it's estimable. And S is for small, has to be small enough to be done in a single sprint. If we're doing 2-week sprints, it has to be able to be done in 2 weeks or less. If we're doing 4-week sprints, it could be a larger user story, but it would still have to be done in 4 weeks or less. And then the last one, the T, is testable. Every user story needs to be testable, and it needs to be testable at 2 levels. Remember our triangle? It needs to be testable at the intrinsic quality level, unit tests, etc., and also testable at the extrinsic level, which is the customer point of view, which is acceptance. So every user story has to be testable. Okay, so that's invest, and so let's add that to our list of things to memorize. Invest. And then the next one we have here is the 3 C's of a user story. So the first C, team, is card. So user stories should be able to be written on a 4 by 6 inch index card or some media similar to that. Card. The second C is conversation. The user story card is the item that is used for the team and the product owner to talk and discuss in order to make sure that the product owner and the team are on the same page when it comes to what is actually supposed to be developed and what it's supposed to look like at the end, which leads us to the third one, which is confirmation. Each user story essentially has to have acceptance tests in it itself. So card, 4 by 6, conversation, that's the starting point. That's where the team and the product owner discuss, and then eventually there will be acceptance tests included on the user story card in order to be used during the sprint review to assure that it's acceptable, that there's confirmation. Okay, so let's add that to the memorization list. So 3 C's. All right, now I've got an example here of a user story card. So we're looking right here. And if you were to go out on the internet and search user story cards, they would be similar. There would be some differences, of course. But typically what you're going to have is you're going to have a title or a name for the user story. And then there's going to be some kind of unique identifier, like user story 321. Then there will be the description like we just talked about. As a librarian, I want to have the facility of searching a book by different criteria so that I will save time while serving a customer. Then there might be some other descriptive words or links to other information that might be necessary. And then there would be acceptance criteria or tests. Sometimes these get included on the back of the card, but the point is that they are on the card rather. Then there will be an estimate of size. It could be ideal days or story points. As I mentioned, most teams do story points. That's more likely what you'll be tested on as opposed to ideal days. But, we'll cover both so you understand the differences. There's probably, it's not listed here, but there's probably going to be a value point assignment. This is where the product owner kind of determines in a relative way the value of the stories. Just like we were doing in planning poker, the product owner might say, well, this story is twice as valuable as this other one, comparing them together. And this is what these value points are what's used to prioritize the user stories. That's supposed to be a V, as in value points. And then typically there's also going to be a indication. Sometimes it's just by colors. It could be words that has to do with you know, where the story came from. Did it come from the customer? That would be considered a functional requirement. If it came from the team, that would be from the technical domain. I'm trying to write where from. You know, it's not me, team, it's the mouse. Clearly, it's hard to do that. That's from, where from. Here it's got customer, tech. You could also have defect. You could maybe have risk. And then there's also going to be an X factor, which would be some kind of word, probably like stable, erratic, incomplete, something like that, to so that the team is designating the user story in respect to the amount of uncertainty or risk that's associated with that user story. And because all of that's a part of the story, right? The story is going to be turned into working software. There may need to be some efforts to actually figure out how to actually do that user story. So that's the X factor. Over to the right here on the same chart, we have some comments about if you are using a software package, excuse me, like Trello or Jira or something like that, excuse me, the user story cards will generally be able to contain more information using, you know, dynamic links and things like that. Could even include things like responsible team member, or depending on how you're doing it, you would break the user story down into tasks, and you might have team members assigned to various tasks for the user story. Okay, so that's typically what a user story card is like. Sometimes they're cards, sometimes they're like on sticky notes, and they're put up on a Kanban board if you're using Kanban to track the project. If you have a story that is too large to be completed in a sprint, it's going to have to be subdivided, or we call it disaggregation, into smaller user stories. And there's 3 ways that we're proposing here that you could go about doing that. You could split it based on operational boundaries. For example, as an operator, one needs to manage reservations, which could be split. For example, there could be one portion that is that has to do with making a reservation, another one that has to do with modifying it, and yet another one that has to do with canceling it. So that could be split into, in this construct here, 3 separate user stories. You could also separate based on exceptions or cross-cutting concerns. For example, in the beginning, develop only one main path, like accept repayment for a loan. Then address exceptions, like what if a person overpays? Then come up with a user story that recognizes that and processes a refund, and or gives the option of allocating the overpayment to a future payment or something like that. And then also adds on other concerns like the check access restrictions or record name of operator. So maybe, you know, when you're working on accepting payments or processing refunds, it's going to check on who the operator is or track that, so that if at a later time, you know, who was it that gave this refund here. Well, you could look and see, okay, the operator's name was recorded. Or maybe you put some restrictions so that maybe not everybody is allowed to do a refund. And so you would have levels of users that have different privileges. Okay, and then down at the bottom, split based on data boundaries. For an example, as an accountant, one needs to enter balance sheet information, which could then be split into summary information and separately receivable details, or maybe you could have AP, so you could have different portions of the overall balance sheet activities that need to be done. So enter AR, enter AP, etc. Make sense? So just to kind of prompt you, give you some ideas about what to do in a Scrum project if you have the scenario arise where a user story is being estimated by the team and it won't fit into a sprint. It's too big. Now, when it comes to determining value for user stories, this is primarily owned by the product owner, right? And it always comes back to money, but money, the value can be looked at from different points of view. So new revenue, obviously, getting new customers and having them buy stuff. Well, below that, there's another consideration, incremental revenue. So somebody's in the process of placing an order, maybe there are some premium features that could be add-ons at that point in time, or maybe added later on. So you have an existing customer who actually buys more of or enhanced parts of the existing thing they already purchased or are in the process of purchasing. Retained value. So this is retaining customers so that they don't go to a competitor. And then the bottom one is operational efficiency. How could things be done to speed up the process of whatever it is so that the cost of delivering the product is reduced? So this then leads us to a discussion about priorities, recognizing that there are some priority concerns that come from both the customer domain as well as the technical domain. And there are some prioritization models. If we look right here, there is value-based prioritization, and the hierarchy of that would be high value, followed by high risk, followed by high value, and then low risk, followed by low value, and then low risk. So, we might have written this a little bit differently, but that's value-based prioritization, and this is primarily the product owner with maybe some input from the team, just simply deciding what he or she wants done most, listening to the team say, well, there's some, greater risks with this user story than that. And so you'd probably want to persuade the product owner to take care of high risk stuff first, because that would have an impact on the future things that need to be done. There's the Kano model, which looks at each of the user stories and classifies them as being mandatory, linear, or exciters. And the mandatory items are those user stories that are musts. And they'll never move the customer or the end user beyond neutral. It's if they're not there, it creates dissatisfaction. If the product owner and the team has done a good job in identifying what are the mandatory or threshold items, you would see that it just gets it to neutral. That's what's expected for the product. Linear items, user stories, are those user stories that as they are implemented, progressively throughout the project and added to the feature set, it will linear increase customer satisfaction. And it can be, in their absence, dissatisfaction, all the way up to high implementation, creating a great deal of satisfaction for the customer. And then the third category is exciters and delighters. And those are features or functions. Those are user stories that are not mandatory. And the absence of them will never result in satisfaction going below neutral. But by adding them, you could create excitement and delight for the customer. These would typically be things that are features that would be included in a premium version of the product, or maybe add-ons that are promoted, at the point of sale. Have you thought about this because it'll really help you, or whatever. So that's the Kano model, and then there's Uyghur's relative weighting method. And this is all using numbers. So each feature is given a value for its benefit, and its penalty given a value for penalty, meaning what's the pain if that feature or function is not included. And then there is the cost side and the risk side. And then those are all calculated together, and that results in, a ranking or a hierarchy, which gives you the priority for the user stories. We also talked about Moscow, didn't we? Did we talk about Moscow? Moscow is another prioritization model. Must, could, I said that differently. Must, should, could, won't. Moscow, M-S-C-W. Must, should, could, won't. And we talked about that one. Thank you for that confirmation. Does it seem like a long time ago, or is it just me? I know it was just last weekend, but it's like last year. Okay, so now let's talk about velocity. Priyanka, that is exactly right. So velocity is the capacity of the team to complete work in a single iteration. So the team has estimated the user stories for size or ideal days, and the sprints are going to be 3 weeks in duration. Obviously, not all user stories can be completed in a single sprint and be done with the project. Well, I guess maybe I shouldn't say obviously. While I'm saying that, I'm thinking, well, maybe you had a very small, short duration project, so you could. But the point is that it's the team's capacity to complete work in a given sprint. And it is an observation. It's not a prediction. So if we're working on sprint 5 and we're working on determining what our velocity is, then it would be the average of the previous 4 sprints. If there were any outliers, you would disregard those. And so it's an observation. If we look over to question or box number 2 here, velocity is used to deal with determining how many user stories we are going to include in a given sprint, and also how many sprints are we going to need to create a release or a set of user stories. And here's an example. In box number 3, a team completed 5 user stories that were sized 5, 3, 8, 13, and 2. 2 user stories, each sized 5, were left half complete. What is the velocity of the team? And the answer is either going to be 31 or 36. 31 is the sum of the completed user stories. If you were 36, you were claiming half of the 2 that were 5. So that would be a total of 10. So you claim half of it, which would be 5, would take you to 36. But it's not going to be 36 because the only thing that counts towards progress is working software. So even if the team had finished 9 out of 10 story points for a user story, meaning it's almost done, and then the sprint ends, that doesn't get counted towards velocity. And you don't mess around with velocity. You can mess around with your estimating, and you can mess around with what user stories are going to be completed in a sprint, but you don't. The velocity is not variable. It is what it is based on past performance. When it comes to levels of planning, we have what's called the planning onion. And let me walk you through this here. Up at the broadest area is the vision level. So the vision level, that's the suits, right? They're the ones that have the strategy and objectives for the company and where it's going. And so they have that overall big vision for the company, which is likely going to include products. And each product should have a roadmap. My example of that website that I'm working on has 3 versions which make up the product roadmap. Version 1 is the free site, version 2 is the membership site, and version 3 is the pay referral commissions version of the site. And the product roadmap is then supported by releases. So for my project, I have 3 releases. So all of the user stories needed for the free version are in release 1. All of the additional user stories that are needed for the paid version, the subscriber version, and then also for version 3, those are all releases, 3 releases. And then for each sprint, we will be pulling user stories from the release that we're working on. A release is likely going to take multiple sprints. And then the sprints are populated by the individual user stories, which are then disaggregated into tasks. And we do the daily Scrum, which is the daily level of planning and coordination. So we call that the planning onion. We already kind of talked about the release and roadmap concept here. So let's just review this quickly. Prioritize high-level epics and determine goals and releases. So we'll use epics and themes in order to group things together. What should be included in what's released. So what are the goals for the releases? Then the first bullet point, establish goals of release based on market demand, regulatory needs, or customer expectations. For each release, you want to estimate the target stories. Repeat until the target stories are assigned an iteration length. It's blending some things here. Be able to estimate velocity and then assign stories to the sprints. So we keep estimating the user stories and we keep organizing that until we can do that. We can come up with an iteration length, a sprint length, and then figure out what our velocity for each sprint is, and then assign stories to the sprints. The next bullet down, iterate until the user stories and release date meets conditions of satisfaction. So that's definition of done or acceptance for the release. And try not to pack too much into a release backlog. So just like you would not want to pack too many user stories into a sprint. You want to have the timelines appropriate and what are included in the events make sense. Okay, so here's a bit more about release planning on this slide here. You've got the product backlog here on the left, and then we might come up with a release plan, which could be flipped and could be looked at horizontally. And you probably plan about 3 releases in advance. or at least you're doing more of the detailed planning on that. Because things are going to emerge when we do, sprint 1 that's going to help in sprint 2, and things that happen in sprints 1 and 2 that are going to help release 3. And then you've got, your subsequent releases where we're just doing very high-level planning. It's called rolling wave planning, where we do detailed planning for things in the future in tandem with doing high-level planning for things in the future. Did I say that right? Detailed planning for things in the near term in tandem with high-level planning for things in the future. And we talked about deciding as late as possible, I believe, meaning that it's better to actually plan the later releases for purposes of making sure we have more information, the most information available. Okay, so estimation. Let's start at the top left. The principles behind estimation. Understand the cone of uncertainty, which is an estimate or best guess to begin with, and then progressively becomes more accurate. In fact, let's just take a break and look at the cone of uncertainty. So at the very beginning of a project, there's going to be a high level of uncertainty. If I were to draw this chart, I would make it a little bit more like this. So clearly, you're going to de-risk the project as early as you can, and then eventually all risk disappears when the project is done. Risk is uncertainty. Okay, below that, the only estimate that matters is the one given by the team. Supported by this comment here, nothing is impossible for the one who doesn't have to do it. So the product owner is like, team, come on, you can do this. The team's like, no, we know what our velocity is. No, the product owner says, I'm telling you, there's no way that that can't be done. I know you can do it. I trust you. I believe in you. But the product owner doesn't have to do the work. Okay, top right, overestimation and underestimation is always going to be an issue that we deal with. It's more likely that we will underestimate than overestimate. And by looking at our velocity from iteration or sprint to sprint, there could be some information that is showing us that we're underestimating, for example, meaning we're thinking the user stories are smaller than they are, and that we can get, a certain number done in a sprint, and then there's a fail. Well, that would mean then that would be discussed during the retrospective, and then we would do something different going forward, which might include doing some re-estimating. Scrum estimating is not necessarily more difficult. However, Scrum exposes bad estimates sooner, which is a good thing. When we were doing our planning poker, you could see that the first time as a team, we didn't know each other. We didn't know everybody's thoughts and concerns. And those kinds of things, get shared and absorbed as a project goes on. And so there's a higher awareness of that. So what we would say is that using estimation techniques, Scrum estimation techniques, might be more inaccurate at the beginning of a project, but they will quickly become very accurate as the project advances forward. Let's see, is there a question here? Can velocity be increased over a period of time for the project? Yes, it can. Now, it's not that it will increase if the team is learning how to work together better and better. You would expect that, if I can just use my mouse here, if we were tracking velocity, so this would be points completed over here. Let me just do PTS for points. And down here is time. and we go from sprint to sprint, right? You would expect that maybe, the first couple of sprints, the team would be learning how to work together, and there would be a steep curve, and then it would kind of flatten out and maybe have, a slow rise going forward as the team emerges as a high-performing team. They get better at their cross-functional behavior. Somebody's sick, the team just keeps chugging along. Other things, oh, sorry. There, I bumped a thing on my screen there. So the team, learns how to work better together, and their estimates become more accurate, etc. And you would expect a high-performing team to have a result like this for velocity, where there's quick improvement, and then it kind of stabilizes and then begins to tick upwards. Okay, we talked about the cone of uncertainty. Let's talk about ideal time. When we do estimating for user stories, we do it in ideal days. When we do estimating for tasks, we do it in ideal time, which means hours. I think that's on the whiteboard, or it was on the whiteboard. Oh, it was on it. So ideal time is the amount of time it takes to complete a piece of work. But that's based on the notion that the team member or members are available to do just the work with no distractions or anything at all. So assuming that Priyanka could sit down at a keyboard and code for 8 hours without taking a break for lunch, no phone calls, no discussions, no meetings of any kind, just work 8 hours, how much could be done in that 8 hours by Priyanka? That's what ideal time is. But the thing of it is that there is no such thing as somebody being able to spend every minute of every day only doing work. There will be distractions. So it has to be converted into elapsed time. Now, we don't convert it to elapsed time at the user story level, but we do convert it to elapsed time when we are dealing at the task level. And what that looks like is, for each team member, you're going to have to do it separately, because some team members have more distractions than others. Some might have other duties that pull them away. Whatever the case may be, you determine how much time in a given day a team member is available to do work. So say it's 5 hours out of 8 for one. Maybe it's 6 hours out of 8 for another. Maybe it's 4 out of 8, but you figure out what it is, and then you take the average, and that average availability is used then to convert ideal time into elapsed time. I should have circled this box here because we talked about this as well. And then I already mentioned this here, only considers actual work time, not the distractions. So that's the concept of ideal time. When it comes to story points, it's different than that. They are a measure of size relative to each other. So we were doing planning poker this morning, where we were looking at grapes versus apples, and then we were looking at oranges and what else do we have? Watermelons and coconuts. And we weren't trying to figure out how much time it would take to eat grapes as opposed to how much time it would take to eat a coconut. It's clear that it's going to take longer to eat a coconut because there's more effort involved. So we have a sense that it's going to take more time. But comparing the coconut to our baseline of 2, right? We came up with a baseline of 2 for the smallest user story. We compare eating coconuts to that baseline, and we say, okay, you know what? It's going to take more effort to eat the coconut than it is to eat grapes or apples. So you can do it like we did. You can also triangulate. For example, when we did our planning project this morning, or this morning for me rather, at the beginning. Oh, that's not it. That is the daily stand-up. Here it is. If I had said, team, I want you to pick a small user story, a medium user story, and a large user story. And then we would then compare other stories to those three, and so we would kind of triangulate on it. Let's say that we did, 2 was small. I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Grapes was small, apples were medium, and coconuts were large. Well, if we then looked at orange and we said, well, orange is smaller than apples but bigger than grapes. So we would know this would fit in between grapes and apples. And so let's say, we had apples at 5 and grapes at 2, then we would say an orange is probably going to be 3. And the values, now I used, in our example, the modified Fibonacci series. What we do in Scrum and Agile, if we're using story points, we're going to use a non-linear scale for the values. So down at the bottom here, there's the modified Fibonacci sequence. The way the Fibonacci sequence works, by the way, it's the value is the sum of the 2 on the right. So let me break this right here because this is a modified Fibonacci. So 13 is 5 plus 8. 8 is 3 plus 5. 5 is 2 plus 3, and 3 is 1 plus 2. If we were doing the real Fibonacci series, this wouldn't be 20. It would be 13 plus 8, which would be 21. I don't know why some use modified Fibonacci and others not, but that's just kind of a common thing to do. If you're doing planning poker, you give everybody 7 cards, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and 20. Another nonlinear scale is doubling, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. You typically don't go too far to the left with the values because that either means that you're being too granular or you've got stories that are probably too big and they need to be disaggregated. Now, somebody just chatted here, should some buffer time be included in the actual estimates? Let me answer that question first by going back to ideal time, and then I'm going to come back to story points and answer the question. When we're estimating in ideal time, we don't add a special amount of time that we would call a buffer. We just allow for the distractions and the interruptions, which could look like a buffer, right? You're saying, Priyanka, if based on your duties in the organization and our workday of 8 hours, you're typically available to be doing your project work 5 out of those 8 hours. So when we are converting ideal time to elapsed time, we will be building in extra time based on distractions and interruptions. We would not call it a buffer, but that's essentially what we're doing. Now, when it comes to user stories that we're using story points, it is different. The points are for the entire amount of the work. And why might we need to have some extra time for a user story? Well, it's likely going to be driven by uncertainty. There might be other things that impact it, but that's the main thing. Sorry, team. So when the team is estimating the size of the user story, they will be including in their discussion and estimates any extra time or buffer time that would be needed for that user story to be completed. So do we accommodate uncertainty when we're using story points? Yes, we're looking at the X factor, and if we've got an unstable user story, then we're probably going to say, this is going to be a bigger user story than one that's similar but has a much lesser level of uncertainty. So that's the story points. Let's compare the two. Ideal time uses things like hours and days, which is easier to explain outside the team, right? The suits like things in days and hours. Everybody's estimate may be different, not a bad thing. It's easier to do at the beginning because we're oriented to think about time. And it does kind of shine a light on wasted time. Story points are harder to explain outside the team. The suit says, well, how long is it going to take to do user story 301? And our answer is, well, that's a 10 user story point user story. And the suit's saying, what does that mean? Tell me how long it's going to take. So the suits have to be converted to story points. Now, here's the thing. It's a lot easier to get consensus when we're estimating in story points. And once we get good at it, it's going to be much faster. We have to remember it's not comparable across teams. So, a team working together will have its own kind of system for sizing the stories, and another team that might even be working on the same project will have a whole different scheme. And so if the velocity of one team is 25 and the velocity of another is 50, it doesn't mean that the team with the velocity of 50 is able to do more work than the teams whose velocity is 25. And we did, when we got our day going, we started with a planning poker exercise. And so, we used all of the team members. So we selected the team. The product owner was there to answer any questions. The team discussed each of the story cards and then decided what their vote was going to be. And then everybody voted at once. If there were outliers, they were discussed. And the reasons for that, those variances, those outliers, were then part of the discussion. And then we did another round of voting. And we would keep doing that until we had our estimates converge or we reached consensus on them. Okay, so advantages of planning poker: it's fun, it's quick, it gets the whole team involved, the team understands a little bit about all of the stories, everybody contributes his or her expertise, and the discussion during the estimation provides clarity in the direction approach and even a bit of design. If we were in the same room team and we were doing a planning poker activity like we did at the beginning of our day together, we would be able to, model it a little bit better. Or if we tried to unmute everybody, but you could hear the background noise. I've tried doing it, it doesn't really work. But you get the idea that if the team's discussing and things like that, you would actually get to the point where your estimates would converge and the team would say, okay, this user story size is, whatever it is. Okay, so we need to wrap things up for the day. So we are ending right here. And that means tomorrow when we get together, we're going to be doing slide 20, or starting with that, which is affinity estimating. And let's see, affinity estimating, we go through that. We're going to talk about tracking progress using information radiators. And then we're going to talk about what we do when we find variances between the plan and the actual results, and then we'll have our quiz. Now let's talk about the values of Scrum. Now this is different than pillars. This is values. So there are 5 values for that, and this is something that I want you to memorize. So I'm going to switch my cameras here and go to the whiteboard, and we're going to add to our list oh, wrong color. You can tell I'm a project manager because that would bother me. So the 5 values of Scrum, and there's an acronym. You can see that on the screen, right? C-Force. Okay, so 5 values of Scrum. And C, F, O, RC. And you kind of know my style here. You don't have to do it this way, whatever works for you, but have some kind of a strategy for memorizing things. It will probably serve you well. So the first C is commitment. The next one, there are four. F is focus. O is openness. Is that two N's or one? I don't know. Openness. We'll blame it on the marker if it's not right. R is for respect. And the last C is courage. And so there's your little chart right there. And let me just briefly go over these. None of these will be a big surprise here. We've talked about some of them already in one context or another. For commitment, that means the team is going to commit to deliver value to the customer. They're on board, there's the buy-in, all of that's there. Focus, the team is going to focus on the few important things at a time. So we're going to do time boxing. We're not going to do things broadly, specifically focus on a few things at a time. O is openness. That's analogous to the T, transparency, and the pillars, meaning we're going to be completely open in sharing information about the project, our own opinions, our fears, our concerns, etc. R stands for respect, and that's kind of a 360 view. We respect ourselves, we respect others, we respect the concepts that we are using as part of Scrum, and and we respect the other stakeholders as well, 360. And the last C stands for courage, and that's the courage to make commitments even when we're in an uncertain environment. Courage to deal with fear that comes from a failure, courage to share disagreements openly yet respectfully, courage to participate in debating technical approaches, etc. Okay, so now let's go to the Scrum Lifecycle chart, and what I want to do is I want to elaborate on this just a little bit. And I'm going to try and use my mouse to do some additions to this. First of all, we have the product backlog. The product backlog has to be kept current, and we call that grooming. Grooming is adding user stories and removing user stories from the product backlog. Product backlog is the scope of the project. The product owner owns that. The team assists in that effort. Related to grooming is pruning. Pruning the backlog is prioritizing and reprioritizing. So the product backlog is pruned and groomed regularly throughout the course of the project. Now, there is a meeting that takes place right here, which is called the Sprint Planning Meeting. Can I just do SP here? Sprint Planning Meeting. Okay, that is one of the ceremonies or events that takes place in Scrum. In the Sprint Planning Meeting, it is a time-boxed event, and it is time-boxed to 2 hours for each week of the sprint. So in our example here, we have a 30-day sprint. So if we have a 4-week sprint, then our sprint planning meeting will be 8 hours in duration. And two things happen during the sprint planning meeting. The user stories that are going to be included in the sprint are selected, right? They're put into the sprint backlog, which is a subset of the product backlog containing the user stories that are going to be completed during the sprint. And the second thing that happens during the sprint planning meeting is the selected user stories are then disaggregated into tasks and estimated. Once that's done, then the work of the sprint begins. There will be a daily scrum, like we did at the beginning of our workday together as our team. And then at the end of the work of the sprint, there will be the sprint review. The sprint review meeting or ceremony is also time-boxed, and it is time-boxed to 1 hour for each week of the sprint. So if we're doing a 4-week sprint, the sprint review meeting would be 4 hours in length. The primary purpose of the review is to showcase and demo the software and get feedback from relevant stakeholders and allow the product owner to say, I accept or I reject the work that has been done. Then, after that, is the sprint retrospective. Now, this is where the team asks and answers 3 questions. What went well, what did not go well, and what are we going to do different going forward regarding the previous sprint that was just completed and the ones that is just coming up. And then the sprint itself will result in working software or value for the customer. And then, of course, everything goes back and repeats for as many sprints as necessary to complete the scope of the project. Let's see. I see a chat here. How similar or different is the product backlog to SRS, Software Requirement Specs document, which is widely used in projects? It's different. And if you will hang on to that question, we're going to have a discussion later on about user stories, and that will help you understand the differences. And we'll get into the user stories that come from the customer and user stories that come from the tech domain, and that will help answer your question. So you okay hanging on to that? Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so a little bit more detailed view of the Scrum project lifecycle. Now let's talk about a couple other things here. When it comes to a sprint, there are some things that affect the duration of the sprint. So the team is going to have to decide how long each of the sprints are going to be, and things that are a factor include the stability of the product backlog. If the product backlog is changing a great deal, then that's going to argue for shorter durations. Because there's a high level of uncertainty, and so you have a greater amount of control on your project if you have shorter sprints. Now, on the other hand, another factor is the cost of iterating. Every time we do a sprint, there are costs associated with the sprint planning meeting, the sprint review, the sprint retrospective, right? People show up to those meetings, you got to pay them, and excuse me. So there is an overhead cost to actually doing sprints. The goal of the sprint is working software. At the end product should be near releasable or potentially shippable. Now, there might be working software that the product owner isn't going to want to release, maybe because it, as a standalone component of working software for the system, doesn't create any value or any usability for end users, and maybe you wait till the end of a release before you release everything. But the idea is it's working software, and it could be released if the customer wanted to do that. Sorry, I just dropped something. I see a question there. I will circle back to your question in just a sec. The sprint duration and deliverables do not change once the team has committed. This is another one of those things that has to be viewed as absolute when we're doing Scrum. So if we say that we're going to do a 2-week sprint and we select 5 user stories based on our velocity or capacity, once that decision has been made, the duration of the sprint does not change, and we do not add or remove any user stories. Now, it could be possible for the product owner to cancel a sprint, but that would be extreme. That would be because there is such a major change to the product backlog that the work of the current sprint is going to be completely irrelevant. You don't change the sprint, you cancel the sprint. And then the bottom one here, the sprint begins with planning and ends with review and a retrospective. And there was a question here, are there any issues with combining the retrospective and the planning ceremonies? And the answer to that is yes. Now, could they be combined depending on the environment? The answer is yes. And the way we would arrive at whether or not it would make sense is who's going to be participating. But they would be separate agendas. So the agenda for the retrospective is what went well, what did not go well, what are we going to do different? And the mandatory participants for that meeting are the team, the Scrum team. Is the Scrum Master going to be there? Likely as a facilitator. Is the product owner going to be there? Maybe, maybe not. If the product owner is there, the product owner could maybe answer questions and help clarify. But the product owner does not weigh in on what went well, what did not go well, and what are we going to do differently. That is all owned by the team. In the planning meeting, the product owner has to be there, and the product owner is the main driver of that meeting. The product owner is talking about or dealing with the priority of the user stories. The team's weighing in. Maybe there's some dependencies that need to be considered, but the product owner has to make the hard decisions with regards to what's going to be done in the next sprint based on the constraints from the team, like velocity and technology and sequencing and things like that. So I kind of answered that from a real-world point of view. Yes, it could be. It's not desirable. On the test, they are completely separate. Did I get you there? I'll keep my eye on the chat box, make sure I got that answered well enough for you, and let's move ahead. Okay, the sprint planning meeting. This is looking right down here. This is conducted at the beginning of a new sprint. It's attended by the team, the product owner, and the Scrum Master. And there are 2 approaches to deciding what's going to be included in the sprint. It can be based on commitment, and it can also be based on velocity. And the goal here is to get team buy-in, make sure that there is clarity between the team and the product owner as to what the definition of done looks like for the user stories that are going to be included in the sprint. And, of course, it should be realistic and achievable. And, there can be a little bit of an issue where you've got, a well-meaning product owner that's driving really hard, and the team says, we can do these sprints, and the product owner is saying, no, come on, you got to do at least one more. I got to have this one in this sprint. You could get a question like that, and it might be, what would the Scrum Master do if you had a dominant product owner that's trying to persuade the team to do more than the team thinks it can do? And that's where the Scrum Master comes in. The Scrum Master plays the role of the mentor, the coach, and assisting in the resolution of those kinds of issues without deciding. The Scrum Master is not a decider. The team decides when it comes to how, and the product owner decides when it comes to what. Okay, the Scrum meeting, Daily Scrum, we've talked about it, right? The entire team attends the meeting. Could the product owner be there? Yes. Does the product owner need to be there? No. Sometimes the product owner can be, an impediment to the meeting, but would be welcome. But if the product owner started asking questions or became the focus of questions being asked, the Scrum Master would have to help facilitate a change, because that would not be effective for the daily Scrum. Duration, 15 minutes. We talked about that. And the agenda. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And what are my impediments? The sprint review. Now, who attends? It's going to be the team, the product owner, the Scrum Master, and potentially others. So optionally, others, that we would want to get feedback from would be end users, operations folks, the suits. All of those would be welcome depending on the relevance of the software that's being demoed and being subject to the acceptance testing and the product owner, giving the thumbs up or the thumbs down when it comes to acceptance. The duration for this, we mentioned this before, it's not just a flat 2 hours, it's 1 hour per week. So if you did a 4-week sprint, you would plan on the review being a maximum of 4 hours in duration. The agenda is to demo the completed software, get feedback, and then see where we are when it comes to the release plan. The retrospective, who is there? It's attended by the team. And I would modify this slightly, and I would say this is the mandatory group that needs to be there. Optionally, the Scrum Master would be there. Potentially, you could have an external facilitator. The role of the Scrum Master would be the facilitator. Now, a good Scrum Master, being a facilitator in a retrospective, would have some knowledge of control charts, the 5 whys, Ishikawa diagrams, things like that. And although the Scrum Master would not be participating in the actual use of the tools, the Scrum Master would be facilitating the effective use of those tools. When it comes to duration, the rule is 45 minutes for each week. Ooh, that was a good 4. That was kind of a lousy 5. So if you had a 2-week sprint, then you would have an hour and a half retrospective max. And what's the purpose? There's the agenda for the retrospective, 3 questions. What worked well? What did not go well? What are we going to do different? And it's not just a chat session. Well, that would be part of it. You will use tools and techniques, like some that I mentioned, control charts, Ishikawa diagrams, 5 whys. There's a number of things that you might use in order to surface assignable causes for issues so that we could then come up with a resolution to those. This is where continuous improvement is going to happen. Continuous improvement is the result of other things, but this is the main thing. And if you were to get a question about the relevance or the necessity of retrospectives, there is no equivocation. You do a retrospective after every sprint. If you don't do a then there's no improvement. Things just stay static. Okay, so we talked about the 4 main ceremonies, right, in a Scrum project. Sprint planning, you with me? Daily stand-up, the sprint review, and then the sprint retrospective. All considered mandatory for effectively doing Scrum. And not doing them or one of them would be considered a fail. Okay, artifacts that we use when it comes to Scrum. We've talked about the product backlog. We talked about the sprint backlog. There's also a release backlog. Depending on the size of the project, it might be advisable to group user stories into releases. If you have a product roadmap, your releases would line up for that. For example, I've got a real-life project that I'm working on, and my product roadmap is got 3 versions. It's a website. The first version is free. The second version includes a membership component, and the third version includes a referral commission portion to it. And so I will then do 3 releases. I'll have all the user stories that will result in version 1, all the user stories that result in version 2. So that's what the release backlog is. And so if you look at it in sequence, the product backlog is the overall scope of the project. The release backlog is a subset of the product backlog, and then the sprint backlog would be a subset of the release backlog. The product backlog might look something like this. It's a list of user stories that are written by the product owner and are going to be developed by the team members. And we had a product backlog for the thing that we did this morning, right? So here's another example of a product backlog. This is more of a list. It just has the title. There would be a user story card for each of the items in the product backlog. But the idea would be it would be prioritized. There could be user stories that are added or removed depending on what the product owner wants. Product owner owns the product backlog. That's a given. Does the product owner create all the user stories for the product backlog in isolation? No, absolutely not, because there are technical considerations that the product owner might not even consider. The product owner's perspective is more the customer side, the end user side, and so the product owner might not even think of things like security or architecture-related things, and there might even be user stories that come from the technical domain that need to be developed before some of the product owner's user stories. Another artifact is the definition of done. The definition of done is primarily a checklist. And this is what forms the agreement between the product owner and the team as to when we consider something completely done. And if we look down here, it's I'm looking for my cursor. It says here, it's usually prepared by the Scrum Master in consultation with the team. That is, I would modify this slightly. The definition of done is really driven by the team. The Scrum Master is never a decision maker. If you have a Scrum Master that's saying we have to have this in the definition of done, then that's an infringement on the empowerment of the team. I agree that the Scrum Master is a part of the effort to develop the definition of done, but I would kind of flip that. The Scrum Master is the facilitator. It's the team that still owns that. So now, is the product owner involved in this? Absolutely, because the product owner is involved in defining the story and what a fully implemented story looks like. So here's a list, a short list of what a definition of done could look like. The story has been fully implemented or the code completed as described. Automated unit tests have been developed with at least 80% code coverage. It could be more than that. This is just an example. Automated unit tests and acceptance tests of the story are passing. No severity has 1 or 2 defects. And then high priority test cases have been automated and added to the regression suite. The definition of done, we point out, is likely to evolve as the team's maturity increases as the project advances.
There are 3 distinct roles in Scrum: the Scrum Master, the Product Owner, and the Development Team. The Scrum Master assists both the Development Team and the Product Owner. The Scrum Master works with the Product Owner to maximize return on investment. The Scrum Master empowers the development team by fostering creativity, removing impediments, and coaching and mentoring as appropriate. The product owner is responsible for project success by defining the project vision, requirements, and priorities. The product owner has to resist the temptation to manage the team or add more important work after a sprint has begun. The product owner has to be willing to make the hard choices during sprint planning. The development team is comprised of 5 to 9 members with a mix of roles and has the autonomy to self-organize and choose how best to meet the goals of the product owner and is responsible for the same. A Scrum Master is a skilled servant leader. A Scrum Master has very little formal authority. However, he or she is expected to assist the team achieve the intended outcomes without interfering with the team's autonomy. The Scrum Master facilitates the Scrum ceremonies such as sprint planning, daily stand-up, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. The Scrum Master removes obstacles or impediments faced by the team. The Scrum Master is also a process coach and mentor. The Scrum Master must not be a line manager of the team. The Scrum Master is not to be a taskmaster either. The Scrum Master is not a technical or design authority, nor is he or she a decision maker for the team. Throughout the course of the project, the Scrum Master must not do anything to rob the team of its empowerment and ability to self-organize. Let's talk about the attributes of a Scrum Master. Scrum Masters need to exhibit responsibility. Even though they are not solely accountable for the team's output, they will consider it their responsibility to remove anything that impacts the team's productivity. They will try to enable the team to do the best that it can. They are humble. They will work in the background and let the team take all the glory. They will use we statements and seldom use any I statements. They are able to set aside their ego and shower all their attention on the team. They are by nature collaborative. They will encourage the team to have conversations among each other and with other stakeholders outside the team. They will nudge all the right people into getting involved and work together in trying to solve problems. They are committed to the team cause. Even if being a Scrum Master is a part-time task for them, they will give the highest priority to the team's needs. Hence, the Scrum Master's work allocation, especially if they are part-time, needs to take this into consideration. They are able to influence. They are naturally good communicators and able to convince others to adopt different approaches. They apply various techniques to mobilize organizational resources when required, walk the political tightrope when required, and in general do whatever it takes to get the team the assistance it needs. They are knowledgeable. It is clear that as process coaches for the team, Scrum Masters need to be experts in the method. They may not be the technical or domain experts. However, they are knowledgeable enough to be able to have productive conversations about the project being done by the team. Tasks for the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is a crucial role, and it is important for you to be able to be clear about exactly how the Scrum Master serves the team. Scrum Masters are servant leaders. This means that they put the team before themselves and assist the team. For example, they set up and ensure that the Scrum ceremonies are effectively carried out. They ensure that there is smooth flow of information within and outside the team, and that there is a spirit of collaboration in decision-making and problem-solving. Scrum Masters must make it their mission to resolve issues that hinder team progress. It doesn't matter what the nature of the issue is, a Scrum Master needs to mobilize the right resources within the organization to resolve those issues in a timely manner and escalate promptly if that does not happen. We need to understand that in the short duration of a sprint, even a few hours of being stuck can make the difference between a successful and unsuccessful sprint. Scrum Masters protect the team. They ensure that the team is not disturbed or asked to deviate from their commitments. If pressure mounts due to unreasonable expectations, they will step in and push back on the team's behalf. They will also play the role of peacemaker when conflict arises by encouraging the parties to focus on the issue, discuss the issue with an open mind, and resolve the conflict. Finally, Scrum Masters are the process coaches of the team. They use their understanding of Agile methods, and Scrum in particular, to guide the team through the do's and don'ts of Scrum. They ensure that the team stays true to the principles of Agile development. Scrum Master Roles, Scrum Teams. Before we discuss the role of a developer on a Scrum team, let's talk about the desirable characteristics of Scrum teams. They should be small and nimble. Team size should be no less than 3 and no more than 9. So that would be 6 plus or minus 3. Exceptions are possible, but uncommon. The small attribute makes the team nimble and improves productivity. It avoids the phenomenon Mike Cohn calls social loafing, and instead produces focus on work. The team size should be just large enough that the team members are able to produce and showcase a significant increment of work at the end of each sprint. Sprint after sprint. Self-sufficient and cross-functional. For example, if a team needs user interface development skills, database expertise, and service expertise, all of those skills must be present on the team. Ideally, team members are generalizing specialists. Team members should not only be an expert or a specialist at one aspect of the development effort, but should also have enough skills and knowledge to fill in other roles as necessary. For example, if you are a UI developer, you should be able to don the hat of a services developer if needed. If a large team is to be split up into smaller Scrum teams, Scrum favors feature teams over component teams. Autonomous and self-organizing. Teams choose for themselves how they are going to organize and meet the goals of the product owner. No one gets to dictate to the team how to get their work done. The team decides, in collaboration with the product owner, the project direction, and the pros and cons of different approaches. Let's talk about some key decision points or factors to consider when assembling Scrum teams. Feature teams over component teams. The first issue is whether it's best to align team members based on features or components. Scrum favors feature teams over component teams. For example, it's best to avoid putting all of the UI developers together and all of the API or services developers together. Why? Because each feature or user story will require both the UI and services or API. Organizing based on components will reduce the incentive to collaborate. The only reason component teams may be justified would be if the components are likely to be used by multiple other teams. Assemble the right people. It's important to get the right mix of people together for the team, the right level of technical and domain expertise. Teams will naturally have both senior and junior level developers. This works perfectly as there will be stuff that is more appropriate for the junior developers and stuff that is not. Also, one of the risks of a small team is that the team may miss out on broader perspective and dissenting views. One way to work around this is to deliberately favor diversity in all aspects: gender, ethnicity, personality traits, etc. It may take some time for the team to advance through the storming stage of team development and develop the trust necessary to work effectively together, but it can be done. Once a team has been formed, it's best to preserve and assign whole teams rather than individuals to projects. It's best to avoid assigning team members to multiple projects at the same time. Distributed team. A distributed team may be unavoidable. Those based at the same geographical location should be co-located in the same team room. And technology, processes, and ground rules should be put in place to overcome the disadvantages of all team members not being co-located. Plotting team size and productivity will likely result in an S-curve. You can see here that a team can actually be too small or too large. Remember, the sweet spot is 6 plus or minus 3. Think of Scrum as a lightweight framework that utilizes principles and practices that assist teams in delivering working software in short cycles to the customer, enabling rapid feedback, continuous improvement, and quick response to change. It promotes delivering value, as in working software to the customer, in an incremental and iterative way. It is not a process or technique for developing software. Rather, it is a framework within which various processes, techniques, and practices are employed. In Scrum, the iterations that deliver working software to the customer are called sprints. In each iteration, or sprint, results in potentially shippable software. This slide is a graphical representation of an Agile project using Scrum. Starting at the left, you can see that the product owner owns the product backlog and in collaboration with the team develops the user stories or requirements for the project. The product backlog is prioritized, with the higher priority items occupying the top of the product backlog. In collaboration with the product owner, the team decides how to group the user stories into releases based on the product roadmap. Once the release planning has been completed, the user stories are then selected for a sprint. The duration of the sprint is going to be 2 to 4 weeks. Once the sprint backlog has been determined, the team then disaggregates each user story into tasks. During each sprint, the user stories are developed. As the code is written, it is integrated into the system, and daily scrums are held. At the end of a sprint, there is a sprint review where the working software is demonstrated and presented to the customer for acceptance. The team then conducts a sprint retrospective. During the retrospective, the team looks at primarily 3 things: what went well, what did not go well, and what should be done differently going forward. The team's velocity is then updated, as are the information radiators, which transparently display the status and progress of the project, and then the cycle repeats itself until the project is complete. A sprint is an iteration in Scrum. At the beginning of a project, the Scrum team determines the duration of sprints for the project. Most sprints are going to be 2 to 4 weeks in duration. Factors affecting sprint duration include the stability of the product backlog. Once a sprint has begun, the duration is never changed, nor are any user stories added or removed. Therefore, if many changes are expected, a shorter sprint duration would be best. However, if the product backlog is relatively stable, a longer sprint duration may be appropriate. Overhead. There are overhead costs associated with each sprint. For example, every sprint is going to have a sprint planning meeting, a sprint review, and a sprint retrospective. If a team has been able to lower these overhead costs by automated testing, continuous integration, etc., these costs can be absorbed more easily, making shorter sprints more desirable. However, if these overhead costs remain high, the team may need to use longer duration sprints. A team may be tempted to extend the duration of sprints in an effort to hide their inefficiencies. Remember, Agile projects favor shorter duration sprints, and it is the Scrum Master's responsibility to coach and mentor the team so it can reduce waste, irregularities, and overuse and make the sprint shorter. The goal of a sprint is to deliver working software. At the conclusion of each sprint, the team should be able to deliver near-releasable or potentially shippable software. This is not easy, especially for an existing product with a lot of legacy features, but it can be done with the right technical practices and mature development processes. Once the sprint duration has been determined and the user stories for the sprint have been selected, the duration of the sprint cannot be altered, nor can any user stories be added or removed. The sprint will end at the appointed time, irrespective of whether the team has met the sprint goals or not. This allows for effective continuous improvement. If the team is unable to deliver the working software as planned, the team will have to figure out why that happened and then make changes to improve going forward. The product owner may choose to cancel or terminate a sprint in specific situations. For example, a significant change in priorities or a mid-course correction may render the current sprint backlog invalid. Given that we are only talking about a couple of weeks of work, the cancellation of a sprint would be an extremely rare event. A sprint will begin with a sprint planning meeting and end with a sprint review and retrospective. There are 3 backlogs used in Scrum: the product backlog, the release backlog, and the sprint backlog. The product backlog is the master container of all the user stories for the project. The product backlog is continually pruned or prioritized so that maximum value is delivered to the customer. The release backlog is a subset of the product backlog. Releases support the product roadmap, and each release is populated with user stories necessary for that release. The sprint backlog is a subset of the release backlog and contains the user stories to be developed in the sprint. As we said, the product backlog contains the user stories for the entire project, and it is the responsibility of the product owner. User stories are features, functions, or requirements that deliver value to the customer. However, the product backlog will also have to contain technical or non-functional user stories necessary for the system to work properly. The product backlog may also include risk or defect-related user stories. The product owner is responsible for keeping the product backlog current and up to date. This is accomplished by pruning the backlog, which is prioritizing and reprioritizing. The product backlog must also be continually groomed. This is the process of adding and removing user stories based on the needs and desires of the customer. There are 4 Scrum ceremonies: the sprint planning meeting, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. Let's take a detailed look at each of these ceremonies. The sprint planning meeting is time-boxed at 2 hours for each week of the sprint. If the sprint is going to be 2 weeks in duration, then the time box will be 4 hours. If the sprint is going to be 4 weeks in duration, then the time box for the sprint planning meeting will be 8 hours. It should be attended by the complete Scrum team, including all roles. The most important aspects of this meeting are the team's capacity and the definition of done. There are 2 approaches to selecting user stories for a sprint. One is based on the velocity of the team, the other is commitment driven. Team buy-in is critical, and the goals of the sprint should be clearly understood, and the desired outcomes should be clearly articulated with the definition of done. Then there's the daily Scrum. The time box for the daily Scrum is 15 minutes, regardless of the duration of the sprint length. The entire Scrum team, including all roles, should attend the daily Scrum. Each development team member individually answers 3 questions. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And what are my impediments? This is how the team members coordinate their work, and the Scrum Master learns of the impediments he or she should be taking care of. The sprint review takes place at the end of the sprint and is time boxed at 1 hour for each week of the sprint. So if the sprint were 4 weeks in duration, the sprint review meeting would be 4 hours. It should be attended by the complete Scrum team, including all roles, plus any other stakeholders who are interested in project success. The purpose of the review is to demonstrate working software and obtain and assess feedback. Feedback may range from full acceptance of the completed software to complete rejection. The sprint retrospective takes place after the conclusion of the sprint review and is time boxed at 45 minutes for each week of the sprint. So if the sprint has 2 weeks in duration, then the retrospective would be 1.5 hours in length. It should be attended by the complete Scrum team, including all roles. However, the product owner's attendance is considered optional. During the retrospective, the team answers 4 questions. What worked well? What did not work well? What should be done differently? And what still puzzles us? One or several problem detection techniques may be used in the retrospectives, and this ceremony is a vital part of continuous improvement. At the conclusion of the retrospective, the team's velocity and the project's information radiators are updated. Then the next sprint planning meeting takes place, and this cycle continues until the project is complete. The definition of done is an important artifact for a Scrum team. It is the primary reporting mechanism for team members, and there may be a different definition of done at various levels. Definition of done for a feature or user story, the definition of done for a sprint, and the definition of done for a release. It's really just a checklist of activities that add verifiable and demonstrable value to the product. It's created by the Scrum Master in consultation with the team. A sample list of the items for the definition of done criteria is given here. The story is fully implemented or code completed as described. Automated unit tests have been developed with at least 80% code coverage. Automated unit tests and acceptance tests in the story are passing. High priority test cases have been automated and added to the regression suite. Note, this is only meant to be an example. Each team's definition of done will vary slightly depending on the maturity of the team and the specific situation of the team.
The product team has taken up a new project called Weathermaster. The team is planning to move to Scrum Methodology, and this is an outline of its first Scrum meeting. Time boxed to 15 minutes, Rick is the Scrum Master of this meeting, where the team members discuss what they did yesterday, their plans for today, and the impediments they faced. All team members are standing up, including Todd, who's joined the meeting via video chat. Rick holds the meeting near a Scrum board. Angela, the product owner, is absent. Rick reiterates that all discussions would be parked until after the Scrum meeting and encourages his team to keep the meeting short. People can chime in to resolve obstacles.
Hi team, welcome to the daily stand-up meeting for the product team on Project Weathermaster. We are in Sprint 1 and today is the second day. As we are planning to transition to Scrum Methodology, I hope you will find this daily stand-up meeting helpful. In this meeting, you will provide information about what you did yesterday, what you plan to do today, and what challenges you faced. I think everyone's here. Let's start.
I don't see Angela. Shouldn't she be here?
I did add Angela as an optional attendee to this meeting, and since she hasn't showed up, we don't have to wait for her, Susan.
Scrum doesn't provide a specific yes or no about the product owner's participation in the daily Scrum. The PO's primary role is to provide direction and clarify requirements and priorities. Since we don't always discuss those in detail at this meeting, the PO is not required to be here. If the POs want to attend, they are generally in listen-only mode for the duration of the meeting. They can use the information gathered during the meeting for separate offline conversations.
What about Todd? He works from his home office, right?
Todd will be a part of the meeting through video chat. It is important that we include every team member in the meeting. Hi Todd, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Am I audible?
Yes, Todd. Team, let's all stand up for the meeting.
Why don't you go first, Aaron?
Yesterday, I was working on creating the mock objects to mask the database calls from the unit tests. The difficulty with this approach is that our server-side logic is so dependent on the metadata that writing a true mock is a mammoth exercise. There are decisions that are taken during runtime based on the data. Some of the stored procedure calls are also made based on the values returned through inline queries that are also embedded in the code. I was debugging the code until about 9 p.m., but for the life of me, I couldn't figure this out.
Aaron, could we request you to be concise when you provide an update? If you think some of the details you describe might be interesting to others, why don't you write a wiki page on it and share the link? So, getting back to your update, did you finish the task yesterday?
No, it turned out to be much more complex than I had imagined. I'll continue to work on it today and see if I can figure out an XML structure to mock the schema and hard-code some return values. But I am really stuck as far as the inline queries are concerned.
I know what you're talking about. There is a reason why the inline queries are there in the code. This is mainly for performance reasons when the overheads of making a procedure call based on a metadata value and then processing the...
Sorry for the interruption again, guys. This is a really great conversation. May I suggest we write this issue in the parking lot?
I'm not sure what you mean by that, Rick.
Let me explain. What Aaron just brought up is a blocking issue. Team members should bring these up during the daily scrum so that everybody knows that one of the team members is stuck. However, the daily scrum is not necessarily the meeting where solutions to every obstacle can or should be found. It looks like Mary knows a thing or two about the issue that Aaron has brought up. Let's jot this down as a parking lot topic. This means the team can have offline conversations after the daily scrum to track it down. I'm also going to make a note that we'll track the impediment Aaron faced daily until it is removed. You should let me know if I can help in any way, right? Aaron, is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I am done. Thanks.
Yesterday I worked on developing the wizards for bulk order creation. I'm almost done. Today I need to write code to handle some of the exception scenarios before I can get them over to Susan for testing. That's it for me, I guess.
Did you forget to mention any impediments?
Not really an impediment at present, but I would like to mention that my computer probably needs to be upgraded with more RAM. It has been slow for the past few weeks.
Okay, I wrote up some scenarios to test the bulk order wizard. I'm looking to get my hands on the code as soon as Mary is done. Today, I'm also hoping to complete the company order testing that has been pending for a while. I'm okay for the moment, but I do have one question. Shouldn't we all be updating the task board as we speak?
We could. It is up to you guys if you think you want to do this during the meeting. If you ask my opinion, we should update the board as soon as we are ready to move the tasks and not wait for the meeting. This will ensure that the board is always up to date and also that we use the meeting time to focus on the conversations.
That's a great point, Rick. I can't see the board very well from here anyway, so maybe we should find a way to create an electronic version of it too at some point.
Great point, Todd. Why don't you go next with your updates?
All right. Hey, Rick, would you like to know about my work on the advertising module first or the integration server?
Whatever the team decides is fine with me. Remember, this is really your meeting, and I'm only here to facilitate and ensure we get the most out of this meeting.
Alright then, I guess I'll start with the integration server. I would like to inform everybody that I managed to set up the integration server that we can use as a sandbox to test the code before checking it in source control. I'll send everybody a link with some instructions and credentials. I have also started looking at the stories for the advertising module. It looks like there are a lot of open statements in the stories that I don't really understand. I guess I should have been paying more attention during the sprint planning. I really need to have a conversation with Angela about this. That is my main impediment right now. I sent her an email but haven't received a response yet.
I don't have anything new to add today. I'm almost through with setting up our project on the freeware tool that I downloaded yesterday. I'll show you guys a demo in the meeting I set up later today. I'll try to chase down some of these parking lot items. Anything else before we close the meeting? All right, that's it for today. Have a great day.
Do you have a moment to chat about the inline queries real quick?
The purpose of a Scrum meeting is to keep the team members updated and resolve any impediments. It's an ideal way to kickstart the day on a positive note. The Scrum Master reinforces the sense of the self-managing team, facilitates communication between team members, brings the team's focus back to what's important, and supports improvement.
So before we dive into the differences between Scrum and Kanban, let's have a look at what exactly Scrum is. Scrum is a simple Agile project management framework that is used by organizations to help teams collaborate, handle unpredictability and complex projects or products while ensuring the products delivered are of the highest value. It describes a set of meetings, tools, and roles that enable teams to work in sync and help them structure themselves and manage their work. Scrum is one of those things that's really easy to understand but very difficult to master. And although Scrum is seen to be used generally by software development teams, its principles and themes are pretty universal and can be used with just about all kinds of teamwork. With Scrum, teams are able to learn from their experiences, what worked out, what didn't, and things like that. They're also able to organize themselves to handle their problems effectively and basically improve themselves by reflecting on them. So how does Scrum work? Here we have the first component, the product backlog. The product backlog consists of a list of tasks that need to be completed so that the goals of the stakeholders are achieved. Then the team decides what tasks from the product backlog they want to take up and deliver in a 2 to 4 week period called sprint, hence the name sprint planning. Next, the tasks that were discussed in the previous phase are added to the sprint backlog. This is a set of tasks which will be focused on in the ongoing sprint. Following this, the Scrum team, which is usually 5 to 9 members strong, will work on these tasks. Now they also have regular Scrum meetings where they talk about their victories, the issues they face, and what they plan to do in the next 24 hours. And then they have the sprint review. The sprint review is a meeting during which the team shows what they accomplished during the sprint. Now during this time, questions are asked, observations, feedback, and suggestions are made. The product owner also gets feedback for upcoming sprints from stakeholders. They also have a sprint retrospective. Now during this session, past mistakes, potential issues, and new ways to handle them are identified. Data from here is incorporated into the new sprint plan. The final step is increment. Here, a workable and usable output is provided to the stakeholders. So now that we know how Scrum works, let's have a look at Kanban. Kanban comes from the Japanese word kanban, which literally means signboard. Like Scrum, Kanban is a popular Agile framework that is a visual system by which the work can be managed with ease as it progresses. Kanban uses something known as the Kanban board to make these things possible. With this, you can easily identify bottlenecks and then fix them cost effectively at optimal speeds. The main focus with Kanban is transparency. Since everything related to the tasks are on the board, everyone can keep themselves updated. It also ensures that teams focus on their current tasks until they're done. This limits the amount of work that's in progress. So on the Kanban board, work is divided into smaller, more manageable pieces. The work that's needed to be done is written on a note or card and placed on a board. Columns on the board help represent where each item is with respect to the workflow. Now let's have a look at what these are in detail. Let's find out how Kanban works. Now the board consists of three major components. There's the to-do list, which represents items that need to be completed. The ongoing column, which represents items that are being currently worked on. And the completed or the done column. Now these represent tasks or items that have already been completed. Now although this is a physical representation of the board, several organizations use software versions of the board that replaces the sticky notes with cards that can be moved from one column to another as work progresses. Now an example of such a software is Trello. So if you want to learn more about Trello, you can check out the link I'll be adding to the live chat in a moment. At this point, you guys must have realized how similar these two frameworks sound. So let's run through some more of their similarities. Let's find out how they are similar. Firstly, they both have principles of lean and agile, which means reduction of waste, and both of them are time-boxed and iterative approaches that enable product delivery in an incremental manner. Both these frameworks aim to reduce the amount of work in progress. This forces the teams to ensure that they focus on a smaller set of tasks. This also makes blockers and bottlenecks a little more visible. In both cases, the work is divided into smaller, more manageable units. Both of these frameworks use pull scheduling. Now this means that products are only built based on demand rather than forecasts. Transparency plays a major role in both these frameworks by helping them drive process improvement. And in both cases, the release plan is continuously optimized. And finally, both these methods aim to deliver releasable software often and earlier than expected. So now that we've reached midway, let me ask you guys a question. Do you guys use Scrum or Kanban in your workplace? Or do you use these software for personal reasons? What exactly do you use these for? Let me know in the live chat. Now let's have a look at how these two frameworks are different from one another. Firstly, let's have a look at cadence. Cadence refers to the amount of time in a sprint or before a release. So when it comes to Scrum, the entire project is divided into time-constrained iterations. That is, into smaller, manageable units. But when it comes to Kanban, it's event-driven. The next criteria we're going to have a look at is release methodology. In Scrum, releases take place after each sprint, which usually takes 2 to 4 weeks to complete. For Kanban, releases take place in the form of continuous delivery. They happen in such a way that changes like new features, configuration changes, bug fixes, and experiments get to the users in a safe, quick, and sustainable manner. Next up, let's have a look at how changes are addressed in both these frameworks. In Scrum, no change can be made while the sprint is in progress. Once it's complete, changes can be considered in the sprint plan and then added to the sprint backlog. With Kanban, changes can be made at any time and incorporated into the workflow. Now, let's consider the metric that's being measured. In Scrum, for planning and process improvement, velocity, which is the measure of the work that can be completed by a team in a sprint, is the key metric. In Kanban, lead time is the key metric. This represents the period of time between a new task's appearance in your workflow and its final departure from the system. Next, let's have a look at how teams work in these frameworks. In Scrum, you need a cross-functional team to achieve your goals in a sprint. In Kanban, cross-functional teams are optional, but specialized teams that focus on particular aspects of the workflow are required. Now, let's talk about new additions. In Scrum, just like handling changes, you can't add any items between a sprint or an iteration. In Kanban, new items can be added to the board as long as there's capacity available for it. Now, let's have a look at the job roles within these frameworks. Scrum has three major job roles: Product Owner, Scrum Master, and Scrum Team. With Kanban, you don't have any specific job roles. Now, let's talk about representation. Or moreover, let's talk about how data can be represented. With Scrum, the board needs to be reset once a particular sprint is complete. With Kanban, the board stays persistent throughout the entirety of the project. And finally, let's have a look at project length. With Scrum, it's better suited for longer projects. And with Kanban, projects that can be completed in a shorter period of time are better. So which one should you choose? Now, selecting from these two methods is mainly based on the requirements of the team. Do you expect your project to be shorter? Do you want to make changes at any time? You don't want to set up job-specific roles? Then Kanban is the framework for you. Or do you want a long-running project with different job roles and involving cross-functional teams? Scrum is the answer for you. Based on the differences we discussed in the last topic, you can make an informed decision. Now, let's have a look at some of the popular companies around the world that employ both these frameworks. Some of the companies that have successfully implemented Scrum are Facebook, General Electronics, and Adobe. Companies that have implemented Kanban are Siemens, BBC, and SAP.
If getting your learning started is half the battle, what if you could do that for free? Visit SkillUp by Simplilearn. Click on the link in the description to know more.
So as part of this tutorial, we are going to understand the typical interview questions which would come across when someone faces the interview for any of the roles in the Scrum. So question number 1, what is Scrum? So Scrum is a framework that enables teams to work together. So with Scrum, teams can learn from experiences, self-organize, working on problems, to reflect on their victories and their losses to improve. So this is a simple framework which will provide a better ability and methodology. One can able to handle it better. So Scrum is very well defined, articulated, and this provides a better insights, and capabilities building exercise is very easier, and roles are well defined. So define the roles in Scrum. So what are the typical roles we come across in Scrum? So one of the roles we come across is product owner. So product owner is primarily responsible for maximizing the ROI by determining the product features, prioritizing it into a list, what needs to be focused on for the next sprint, and constantly reprioritizing and refining it. So what happens is, whenever we may require to deliver, it is very important for us to have the requirements clear. What requirements needs to be fulfilled? To fulfill that requirements, the products what is produced should have specific features and functionalities. So product owner will have the list of features and functionalities which needs to be created when product comes out as a result of a project. So product owner owns this, primarily responsible to ensure these list of features are identified and those are prioritized as required. So next role we can think of is Scrum Master, who helps teams learn and apply Scrum to obtain business value. So Scrum Master helps removing impediments. Impediment is anything which can stop things to flow smoothly. So protects them from interface and helps the team to adopt agile practices. Now Scrum is one of the methodologies for agile approaches and practices. Now remember, the term agile itself is not a practice. It refers to indicate that move faster, become flexible, respond to change, be flexible. Now Scrum methodology, especially Scrum Master, should understand this dynamics and ensure the team understands this, and Scrum Master should guide the team to adopt these methodologies and ensure the results are accomplished accordingly. So next role is Scrum team. So Scrum team is a group of individuals who work together to deliver the requirements of the stakeholders. So Scrum team is generally of the size like 5 plus or minus 2 who are self-organizing. So various different capabilities the Scrum team members would have. So each of their capabilities complement to accomplish the results required. So question number 3, what are the responsibilities of the Scrum team? So Scrum team is self-organizing, as I mentioned earlier. So it is a self-organizing team that has 5 to 7 members, and the responsibilities would include the development and delivery of working products during each sprint. Now we are seeing the new terminology sprint. So what is the meaning of this sprint? Now sprint refers to an iteration, a time-boxed iteration which will have a specific deliverables to be accomplished as part of it. So self-organizing team takes that specific working piece, what needs to be delivered. So that is a sprint backlog, we call it as. So from the product backlog, the features, functionalities which needs to be delivered as part of this specific iteration called sprint, time boxed iteration, and those sprint backlog items are delivered. The output of that sprint would be the features, what is being taken as a working piece, working product. So to demonstrate ownership and transparency for work assigned to them. So they own it, the entire thing assigned to them, there should be ownership. So ensuring the success of daily Scrum meeting by providing crisp and correct information. So Scrum has one event, there are 5 events basically. So one of the events which happens daily is daily Scrum meeting, where the team comes up with Scrum Master. So they would speak about what is that they have accomplished from the previous stand-up to till now. Is there anything which is stopping them to move forward? So giving the crisp updates, specific summary updates, so that Scrum Master understands the status. So any specific changes or any specific support which are required, Scrum Master would discuss separately with those individuals and get it done. So it should be minimum 15 minutes meeting when we say daily stand-up meeting. So Scrum team collaborate with each of the team members, they work together and they self-organize. So next question, the differentiate between Agile and Scrum. Now it is very essential to understand the terminologies differences. So if we just end up with looking at wrong understanding of each of the terminologies, then explaining will become difficult. So what does it mean by Agile and what it is when it comes to the terminology called Scrum? The term Agile refers to ability to move quickly and easily by becoming more flexible and adaptable. This is what the meaning which gets associated with the term Agile. So many times I have seen people answering Agile is a methodology, Agile is a iterative and increment methodology. And also I think when you search through the popular search engines, you may come across that, which is wrong. So Agile is the terminology which is used to state to move quickly and easily by becoming more flexible and adaptable. This we should keep in mind. So if our question may be like, what are Agile methodologies? Then you can come across like one of the Agile methodologies is Scrum, and you can go on various different methodologies what we have. So Scrum is an Agile methodology, right? The term Scrum is the name given to the Agile methodology which enables organization to become Agile, right? So to become Agile, obviously there are various methodologies. Scrum is very popular. So that is the main difference. So further if you look at Agile Manifesto on 12 principles which acts as guidelines to become Agile. So there is something called Agile Manifesto, 4 points, clearly articulates what needs to be focused on to become Agile. and that is supported through the 12 principles which guides. So Scrum is used in projects where requirements are constantly changing, means I want to become agile, so I adopt Scrum. So this definitely has to align to Agile Manifesto and take the guidelines, whatever is mentioned in 12 principles of Agile Manifesto. Then looking at leadership perspective, roles perspective. So Manifesto mentions the required collaboration interactions to become agile. Whereas Scrum defines the roles like the Scrum Master, the product owner, the self-organizing teams, which is cross-functional self-organizing team. So these are the main three roles which Scrum defines. Now generally when we say projects, we come across the role like project manager. So do we see such project managers in Scrum? Answer is no, because the Scrum Master who engages with the team regularly, more than management, they focus on doing facilitating role to the Scrum teams so that things can be delivered the way it is required and more flexibility is given to the team to take the calls to accomplish the results. So Scrum Master facilitates, whereas the product owner, as I mentioned earlier, looks at the product backlog and prioritizes and provides what are the features, functionalities needs to be created in the next iterations. So speaking about flexibility, definitely Agile Manifesto mentions the required focus on working software and focusing on changes. So that's the focus, the direction what it provides. So Scrum approaches enables teams to react to changes quickly. The Scrum methodology is made such a way that team understanding that can able to react, and those changes and modifications are made visible to the team. So delivery perspective, Manifesto provides necessary guidelines on frequent delivery of product or software. So Scrum with time-boxed iterations called sprints builds, delivers to the users regularly and upheld agile principles. That is very important. So delivery here is as per the user's requirement, as per the customer requirements, because customer, when we want to become agile, customer has to involve very closely, stakeholder has to collaborate. Without that, you cannot become agile. So next point is about collaboration. Agile Manifesto stresses on individual interactions and customer collaborations. So based on this, if you look at in the Scrum, how are they demonstrating this? So there are various events which happens in Scrum. So as I mentioned earlier, we have daily stand-up meetings and other Scrum events like sprint retrospective, sprint reviews, daily stand-up meetings, which happens like sprint planning, which happens regularly. So it becomes a reason for collaboration and everyone to discuss and take the call. So question number 5, what are the main artifacts of the Scrum process? Now product backlog, so which consists of list of new features, changes, which are organization is looking for to bring into the existing features, changes to the existing features, bug fixes, changes to the infrastructure and several other activities to ensure a particular outcome. So product backlog. So then we can speak about sprint backlog, a subset of product backlog. So the sprint backlog contains tasks that the team aims to complete to satisfy the sprint's goals. So set of product backlog things are taken, put into sprint backlog, and those are the features which are supposed to be produced as a result as part of that particular sprint. The team first identifies tasks from the product backlog that need to be delivered to achieve a goal. So these tasks are then added to the sprint backlog. So the team first identifies tasks from product backlog as per the priorities, the list which is prioritized in the product backlog, that is taken, put into sprint backlog, and then those are delivered. So next you can think about product increment. The product increment is the combination of all product backlog tasks completed in the sprint and the value of the increments of previous sprints. The outcome should be in the usable condition even if the product owner doesn't decide to release it. It is very important, each of the increments which comes out so needs to fulfill this. Now question number 6, how are the product and sprint backlog different from one another? Product backlog versus sprint backlog. Let us see a few differences. So product backlog is the list of items that needs to be completed for developing the product, which is the list of all the features functionality, consolidated one. Whereas sprint backlog is the list of items to be completed during each sprint, which are taken from product backlog. The backlog, when it comes to product backlog, The backlog is collected from the customer by product owner and assigned to the team, whereas in sprint backlog, the teams collects the backlog from the product owner and sets up the time frame for the sprint. So product backlog is specific to end goal, ultimate objective, whereas sprint backlog is specific to that sprint, specific iteration called sprint in Scrum. What is that we're going to produce as part of it? Product backlog is based on customer vision, whereas sprint backlog will vary based on the product vision defined by product owner. So prioritized list you take from there, product backlog. So product backlog is independent of sprint backlog, whereas sprint backlog is dependent on product backlog. Reason we know already, I explained. So this is the prioritized list of backlogs we take from product backlog and create this specific product as part of sprint, which become sprint backlog. So product backlog refers to until the project is complete, the product owner maintains the product backlog. Whereas sprint backlog, when it comes to sprint backlog, each new sprints as backlogs added by the team as each sprints are initiated. So next question, who is the Scrum Master and what does he or she do? So a Scrum Master promotes and supports the adoption of Scrum in the team. Scrum Master helps everyone to understand the theory, practices, rules and values in the Scrum. So Scrum Master is playing the role of facilitation, enablement, right? So Scrum Master ensures the team follows Scrum values, principles and practices, removes blockages that may hamper the progress of the project, protects the team from being distracted, ensuring the team delivers value during every sprint. So next question, what happens in daily stand-up sessions? So daily stand-up sessions are the discussion which are done daily that takes place and are usually 15 minutes in duration. The objective is to understand what went well, what tasks are completed from the last stand-up session, what tasks are pending, and the obstacles the team was facing. If at all any specific task is not accomplished for certain reasons, so what are stopping the team to accomplish that? That needs to be made visible. So that separate meeting can be held to discuss on that and do the necessary corrections by taking proper actions. So the objective of this daily stand-up meeting is to understand the overall scope and status of the project. Further, individual discussion can be taken up after the daily stand-up sessions. As I mentioned earlier, if you find something is not accomplished as per the plan, now how do we ensure that is corrected? And why is it happening? Is there any support is required by the team to focus on that? So something like that can be checked on. Question number 9, what is Scrum Ban? So Scrum Ban is a development methodology that is a combination of Scrum and Kanban. So this can be used to meet the needs of the team that aims to minimize the batching of work and to adopt a pull-based system. So Kanban is called as pull-based system. So which actually helps in terms of visualizing what work is in progress. And since it is a visualized system, it is visible to everyone. So it works in terms of making people become conscious to take that work and get it closed quickly. So it's also called pull system because work is pulled from that particular list. So when this Kanban approach or methodology or thought is applied in Scrum, we call it as Scrum Ban. So combination of this definitely helps in terms of making that entire journey successful and supports the Scrum methodology. So Scrum Ban includes the structure of Scrum along with the flexibility and visualization of Kanban. So Scrum Ban is used by the teams that need to be structure of Scrum, that has the structure of Scrum and the flexibility of a flow-based method like Kanban. So question number 10, what is Sprint Zero and Spike? So the term Sprint Zero refers to the short amount of effort put for creation of vision, a rough skeleton of the product backlog. So now we do this whenever we need to understand certain things, how things looks like, to get certain insights. So this also includes insight towards estimating the release of products. So you get some vision, it gets some clarity, right? So this Sprint Zero are required to create project skeleton alongside research spikes, keeping minimal design, develop a small number of stories completely, have low velocity, and be lightweight. So speaking about the spike, so spike is set of activities used in extreme programming. I think this was introduced there in extreme programming, that is one of the agile methodologies. So involving research, design, investigation, making proof of concepts, etc. So the objective of spike is to reduce the risk of technical approach by gaining knowledge, which helps understanding requirements and to improve reliability. So more aware we are, more clarity we have, I think putting step further will become easier. So informed decisions you can take. So next question, what is Scrum of Scrums? Now Scrum of Scrums is a terminology used for scaled agile techniques, which is required to control and collaborate with multiple Scrum teams. So when will we come across the need for collaborating between multiple Scrum teams? So these are the scenarios where organization has a complex structure, complex in nature, where you may require to handle them together, all of them together for accomplishing the common objective for business. Various Scrum teams you would have. So Scrum of Scrum helps in terms of better collaboration and handle them easily or better way, better control. It is best used in the situations where teams are working together on complex assignments. Just visualizing the system, various different deliverables which are not a simple deliverables which we can do with a simple Scrum team. Instead, we have various different deliverables which needs to be made, and dynamics are too complex. So bigger projects, then Scrum of Scrum approaches can be taken. So scaling the agile methodologies to that level. So it is used to establish the required transparency, collaboration, adaptation to the required scale to ensure the products can be developed and delivered. So whatever the products are delivered, whatever we consider to be delivered, so those needs to focus on the business objectives, which is very essential. So what is user story mapping? So user story mapping represents and arranges user stories that help with understanding the system's functionalities, the system's backlog, planning releases, and providing value to the customers. So first of all, we write user stories to understand the required features functionality in the user perspective. Now if we map those user stories, which user story linked to other user story, which functionality links to other functionality, determining that will become easier. So now user story maps arranges user story based on the priority along the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, they are represented based on increasing level of sophistications. So this will help in terms of handling in a regular flow, in a specific flow, not regular flow, specific flow, so that things can be done in order with full clarity. So question number 13, what happens in sprint retrospective? So after the sprint review, so sprint completes, so sprint review happens, the sprint retrospective is done. So during this meeting, the lessons learned, what went well, what mistakes we did, what were the issues, so is there any new way of doing things? So all these are discussed so that these necessary corrections can be considered in the upcoming iterations, the sprints. So data from year is incorporated when planning the new sprint. So the learning what you had, you are going to collect it, what went well, what went wrong, what was supposed to be the best approach and how did we approach it, is there any other way of doing it? So these are discussed and very essential to do it at the end of completion of each of the sprints review. Question number 14, what is empirical process control in Scrum? So empiricism refers to work based on facts, experiences, evidences, observations and experimentation. So empirical process control is established and followed in Scrum, ensuring project progress and project interpretation is based on facts of observation. So actual facts and figure is very important. Any decisions what we make, any progression what we make should be always based on ground facts and actual pictures. We should not deviate from it. So these rely on transparency, observation and adoption. Obviously when you are working on the data on ground reality, so you are working on the actual one, it is transparent, it is on the observed data. The mindset of the team and the shift required in the thought process and culture are very essential to accomplish the agility required by organization. So mindset of the team is very essential. And adoption of process, compliance to the process, the culture, the behavior obviously plays a very important role when you do something within the organization. So that needs to be done as per the need, which should complement to the business objectives. Very important. And that should be based on facts, not on some thoughts or assumptions or ideas. So next question is, what are some drawbacks of using Scrum? So Scrum requires individuals who have experience, without whom the project will have a risk of failure. So one does not have a capability, difficult. Scrum requires team to be collaborative and committed. So people collaborating, individuals collaborating itself is a big challenge in many organizations. So bringing this into the place is very important when you want to adopt Scrum. So Scrum requires teams to be collaborative and committed to ensure the required results. They should work together, and also they should collaborate with customers, stakeholders. The less experienced Scrum Master can cause the failure of the project. So be careful. Scrum Master is the one who is facilitator. We should understand this. Who enable the Scrum teams, who ensure Scrum teams goes the way we need them to work. If Scrum Master doesn't understand this dynamics, does not have the clarity on this, obviously he or she cannot enable to team to become that. If tasks are not well defined, the project can have any inaccuracies. Scrum works better for smaller projects and would be difficult to scale to large complex projects. That's where we were discussing on a few questions before this. Scrum of Scrum we were discussing about when it becomes a complex project, which those needs to be handled together, which will become complex. So next question is, what are the skills of a Scrum Master? So a strong understanding of Scrum and Agile concept. Scrum Master should have fine-tuned organizational skills. So when Scrum Master is working with a self-organizing team with various different capabilities, so unless the organization skills, interpersonal skills, if Scrum Master does not have, working with them will become difficult. So Scrum Master should be familiar with technology that the team uses. Basic understanding of that, how it works, the dynamics associated with that. And Scrum Master should have an ability to coach and teach the team to follow Scrum and its methodologies. And very clear about the terminologies, artifacts, and all the events what happens. So Scrum Master should have an ability to handle conflicts and resolve them quickly. So conflict is a scenario which would happen for various different reasons. However, when conflict occurs, the Scrum Master should not shy away from it. Own it to resolve in the interest of the project, whatever is being done. It is very important. Scrum Master has to be a servant leader. So it is not like I'm a specific manager or leader of certain kind and I'm doing this with certain way. No, I'm actually facilitating, I'm guiding, I'm showing certain direction to the organization so to the team. When I say organization, I'm speaking about Scrum team, so that they are enabled to take up the specific project and accomplish the results accordingly. Question number 17. How can discord be dealt within the Scrum team? Now the root cause of the issue need to be identified and addressed. Complete ownership needs to be established when you deal with this and try to diffuse the disagreements. So emphasizing on the focus area that complements the project. So here when we take up any of the discussions, any of the opportunities or any actions what we take, everything should be revolving around ultimate objective of whatever we are doing. So when we need to resolve something, when we get into the root causes, always it helps to look at the actions in terms of eliminating those causes. So once the causes are eliminated, it is quite obvious you can able to deal with it and address it with easily with the right set of actions. So emphasize on focus areas that complements the project, in the sense that should be the ultimate direction. Not my individual interest, not that individual interest. I favor this person, I favor that person. That should not be the case. So favoring this solution or favoring that solution, I'm okay with this particular technology, I'm very happy with this technology. Not such thoughts. It is the direction what is set, I should move things in that direction. So to establish a common understanding and to guide the team to that direction. Performing continuous monitoring and providing complete visibility. Very, very important. So next question, what is a user story? So user stories are an agile software development project management tools. It provides the team with simple natural language explanations of one or more features written from the end user's perspective. Now, for example, I am a account holder in a bank. So first, what is the facility a bank would give to account holders? There is ATM banking, there is net banking, there is mobile banking, and there is over the counter. Now, when bank is working on creating certain specific features or specific mobile app to the account holders, now what are the things user needs? That needs to be visualized. Now, if I say the role here is account holder, as an account holder, I want to download the statements of every month. As an account holder, I want to download the statements every month. This is what my requirement is. How will you facilitate this? This will provide the insight towards how the bank, what are the features and functionalities, and how these requirements can be fulfilled by the bank, and what features functionality the particular mobile app should have so that account holder can download the statements. So user stories will provide that insights, what every users. So account holder is not just an user here. There are many users when it comes to mobile app of a bank. We have people who monitor it, manage it, who develop it. So they need to have a clarity on what exactly they need, and that needs to be written as part of user story, that what features, functionality can be easily determined out of it. So a user story does not go into detail. It just mentions, as I gave an example, it just mentions how a certain type of work will bring value to the end user. The end user in this case could be external end users or even internal customers or colleagues within the organization. So if I'm an organization, I produce an HR application, I create an HR application for claim processing, which I don't have till today. So that is for internal users. In the bank example, I'm speaking about external customers. So user stories also form the building blocks of Agile framework like epics and initiatives. These help ensure that the team work to the goals of the organization through epics and initiatives. So further, the requirements for making the user stories a reality are added later after discussing with the team. So to write a user story, the involvement of the team members are very essential. They should discuss and come out and agree, yes, this is the features functionality which should be there. User stories are recorded on post-it notes, index cards, or project management software, whatever is feasible and whatever is available there. Next question, how are the user stories, epics, and tasks different? So user stories provides the team with simple explanation of business requirements created from the end user perspective, as we saw the few examples in the previous questions. Epics are the collection of related user stories. They're usually large and complex. So these epics are created with specific objectives in mind, and user stories are grouped. So that will form an epic. Whereas task refers to the one which are used to track work. So they are used to further broken down from the user stories. So there is the smallest unit in the Scrum used to track work. A person or a team or two people usually work on the tasks. So these tasks or through this task, I think the features functionality what are required to be accomplished are done. So question number 20, what is sprint? Now as I mentioned earlier in the question number 4, so sprint is the terminology used in the Scrum. I think we explained various different concepts as we went through. So sprint is the terminology is used in Scrum, which refers to time boxed iterations. So we understood what is this iterations in Scrum approaches when we are going through that. The creation of specific module or feature which is part of a product is done during the sprint. The duration of sprint varies between a week or two. So means it's a short duration. Simple few features functionalities are taken and created. So what is velocity? So velocity is the metric used in Scrum that is a measurement of the amount of work that is completed by team during the sprint. So this is help to measure how things are moving, how faster they are moving. It refers to the number of user stories completed in single sprint. So this speaks about that speed, so or velocity. Velocity, how faster we are going, how slower we are going. This helps to vary the variations we can do that velocity depending on what business need. So what are the responsibilities of a product owner? So product owner define the vision of the project. They anticipate the needs of the customer and to create appropriate user stories. So they don't write user stories as such. They definitely have a set of people who should get involved, the team, to write the user stories. A lot of discussion has to happen, brainstorming has to happen to write user stories. But product owner is accountable. So product owner has to evaluate the progress of the project based on this backlog what project or product owner has, and has to be licensed for all product related questions. The team may have certain questions, sprints, as the sprint progresses. The Scrum team may have certain questions, clarification relating to the user stories. Those needs to be clarified. What is burn up and burn down charts? So generally when we say chart, it is a graphical representation. So burn up chart is a tool that is used to track the amount of work that has been completed. So it is a bar chart. The amount of work completed, the height of the bars keeps increasing in burn up chart based on what is completed, which will show the total amount of work the need to be done for a sprint or a project. So it is a bar chart where each of the bars keeps increasing in its height as number of things get delivered increases. So burn down charts typically, again a graphical representation, a bar chart. So what is pending to be delivered? It shows that. Now initially you will have a bigger bar, and as the project progresses the height of the bars reduces, indicating what is that is pending for deliverables. It is a representation of how fast the team is working through the user stories. It helps you to understand that. So it shows total effort against the amount of work for each iterations, which is helpful for you to see to that what is pending to complete. Question 24. How is estimation in the Scrum project done? So the estimation of user stories is done based on its difficulty, a particular scale in which is used to assess the difficulty of user stories. So you have to analyze how difficult or easy is that. Some of the scales which are used like numeric sizing 1 to 10, t-shirt sizing like S, ML, XL, Fibonacci series or dog breeds based on their value. So many such approaches are taken. What are some risks in Scrum and how are they handled? So first of all we should know what is risk. So some types of risk in Scrum are related to budget, people, sprint, product, knowledge and capability. Now when we say budget, risk of increase exceeding that allocated budget, taking more, looking for more variations. I estimated for X, it is going like X plus delta X. So can we control it? We need to look at that. So you need to assess that risk. In what possibilities the cost can escalate. People related like team members need to be of appropriate skills and capabilities. If they lack that, obviously difficult. It's not about just skills and capabilities, the culture, the behavior, the attitude, the energy, the synergy, that collaboration, what people will have. Then sprint related in terms of duration and deliverables, exceeding the duration, addition of scope to that sprint in between. So that challenges, that difficulties. So product referring to user stories and epics, having ill-defined user stories and epics, not properly articulated. There is no proper visualization when you look at that user story, not understanding. So nobody is explaining it correctly. So then knowledge and capabilities. So it is not just related to the people here, it's an entire system. Everyone who is involved with the specific resource with its capability. It can be technology capabilities also. So when I say risk, it basically involves identification, assessment, analysis and defining risk response plans and implementing them. Now, when I say assess, assessing the risks should be qualitative as well as quantitative. So depending on the impact and probability of a risk. If it is a high impact risk, obviously you are required to do both qualitative and quantitative. If a simple one with a very less impact, you can take the call accordingly to what extent you may require to analyze and have the response plans for it. So once you have implemented and defined and implemented the response plans, quite obvious, you should keep monitoring it and manage the risks. Now, risk impacts and probabilities may vary as the project progresses. So we may require to keep assessing the identified risk and keep identifying the new risks as we progress in the project. So these are done on a continual basis right from starting of the project till completion. The reason I told, it is essential to understand that the impact of the risk is based on the proximity of actual occurrence of the risk. Now, for example, if you start working on something, nothing is delivered at the moment. Now, if specific risk of people not available or customer is not involved, initial stage, very initial stage. So risk impact is accordingly. Project would delay in entirety, or requirements not very clear, it is delaying. Something of that sort of impact you will have. Now, as the project progresses, almost like 50% of the project complete. Now there is some challenges or risk associated with issues are occurring related to customers' involvement. Now you are mid of project, so again you will have a different kind of impact. 50% is delivered. Now you need to progress because active involvement of stakeholders, including customer, is very important when you are becoming agile. So when that is not happening, as an example, I'm taking the involvement of customers, the collaboration part of it. If that is not happening, now here the impact level is not equal to the impact level when this happens in the starting of the project. Same type of risk what we are assessing. So that is the reason each of the risks you should keep assessing. The identified one, keep assessing as the project progresses and check on is there any new risk is introduced as the project is progressing. So next question, what are some popular tools used in Scrum? So these are the list. So you can think of GitHub, Zoho, Trello, Jira Software, Yodix, varies version 1. So now what I am saying is these are the tools, technology tools. So when we say tools, we cannot just limit our thought to technology tools. So what exactly this tool does? What are the techniques used? That we need to be very clear. Right? The metrics, what is measured and methodology of measuring it. And what processes are used, what steps are used. So what needs to be used? So unless we are clear relating to specific type of project, usage of these tools may not make any sense. You cannot even implement or customize this for the requirement what you are trying to accomplish. So you be clear about it when you are selecting the tool. So 27, how does Scrum Master track sprint progress? So we have various different events which happens in Scrum, like daily Scrum meetings, Scrum retrospective, Scrum planning, Scrum review, and checking on the defects which are escaped, density of the defects, burn down, sprint burn down, velocity. So checking all of this provides the better insight to Scrum Master so that tracking the progress of the sprint will become easier. So and how to deal with the scope creep? Now before we understand the dealing with scope creep, we need to understand what is scope creep. So the term scope creep refers to the change which is uncontrolled and added without checking the impact on the constraints like scope, time, costs. Now what happens is you will be doing certain or delivering certain features. Now you are forced or you are influenced or without your knowledge, some additional things are put in place. So which may impact later. It may add value, it may not add value later, doesn't matter, but it may lead in terms of impact your cost, time and schedules, which is unexplained. And that extra effort what you have put in, extra cost what you have put in, will become like not recognized by customers and you will not get anything paid for it. So scope, to avoid the scope creep, to deal with it, one has to ensure close monitoring of works being done on day-to-day basis, because scope creep can happen through team members. Team members are influenced by consumer. Because of that, it may happen. So understanding, communicating the vision to the team for ensuring the alignment. So the team is very sensitive about that changes what is happening. Then capturing, reviewing the project requirements regularly against what is delivered, to emphasize to the team and customer about the requirement signed off, so that someone will not come and influence you or make that additional things to be delivered. They need not push you. Right, ensuring any change introduced to go through change control. So no changes without any proper approval by the authorities, so that only those what is required to be implemented is implemented, and that is done formally through the formal change request. So avoiding gold plating. So it is a bit different thought process when we say gold plating. So we were doing the projects are trying to add certain things into the scope to please the customer, as an example, doing something additional, providing some additional features and functionality for which we are not paid. So scope creep is not a terminology used for it, but gold plating is the term used. But however, since it is an additional scoping, so we are just added here. So don't say that when the moment scope creep we says that is not gold plating. Gold plating is a different direction. So just to explain you, along with scope creep, what else would happen to where the additional deliverables would come in, which is gold plating. So question 29, what is MVP and MMP, which means minimum viable product and minimal marketing product. So now minimum viable product is a concept of lean startup which stresses upon the impact of learning while performing product development. So this allows one to test and understand the idea by getting exposed to the initial version of the product for target customers and users. So to accomplish this, one has to collect all the required relevant data and learn from the collected data. So the thought behind MVP is to produce the product, to provide access to the users, and to observe how the product is used, perceived and understood. This will also provide more insight towards what the customers or users' needs are. So when it comes to minimal marketable product, this refers to the description of the product, which will have a minimal number of features that addresses the requirements of the users. The MMP would help also the organization reduce the time to market because you have the clarity. What is that we may require to provide? Now question number 30, what does DOD means? Definition of done, right? So DOD refers to the collection of deliverables, which includes written codes, comments on coding, unit tests, integration testing, design documents, release notes, etc. This would add variable and demonstrable values to the project development. So DOD is very helpful to Scrum while identifying the deliverables to achieve the objectives of project for the stated reason above. So defining the steps required to deliver the iterations, the usage of appropriate tool like burn down to make the process more effective, ensuring on-time feedback throughout the project life cycle, ensuring the walkthrough of the product backlog items are done and understood correctly. So then creation of checklists for product backlog item, ensuring the DOD is defined to become task oriented, involving the product owner for reviewing during the sprint and sprint retrospective. That is about DOD. The next question, how can a Scrum Master be a servant leader? It's a very important thing to understand. So what is the meaning of the servant leader? The term servant leader mainly stresses on service orientation, which a leader should demonstrate. So today we say every organization is service organization. Even an organization who is producing car, if there is no service orientation, they cannot sell. So more stresses on being service orientation. The Scrum Master needs to be facilitator, a guide, a mentor, etc. This helps the team have increased involvement and empowerment. So now question number 32, how can one coordinate between multiple teams? So one of the most common approaches for this is Scrum of Scrums meeting. So where members representing each Scrum team discusses the progress, performance, issues, risk, etc. together. This is complex structure, what you're speaking about. The frequency of these meetings must be predefined, well articulated, well defined. Generally, Scrum Master would represent the particular Scrum team. On behalf of that Scrum team, they would go and represent in the meeting. Besides having a Chief Scrum Master, whose responsible is coordination and collaboration among all Scrums, who facilitates these meetings.
Thank you guys. With that, we have reached the end of the Scrum full course video by Simplilearn. I hope you have found this informative and helpful. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more from Simplilearn.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.